C 611 to 195. To the most beautiful goddess. Explore new worlds at novel bin.com. In the Pontus Euxinus Sea, myriad hues of brilliance unfolded. Compared to the last time Zeus had visited, this ancient palace of the sea god had been rejuvenated. The sea surface mirrored the colors of the sky, with colorful corals growing from the seabed, and fish of all hues swimming among them. Creatures with divine bloodlines multiplied and thrived, showcasing the extraordinary nature of this place with their mystical presence. As all gods converged, thunderclouds and fierce winds rose and fell over the sea, flowers grew in midair, their petals falling and bringing waves of fragrance. In the ocean, immense scallops opened their shells, revealing pearls that shined like stars. All this had been prepared for the bridal couple, but when the divine king stepped down from the golden carriage, it was no surprise to find that the sea nymph Thetis was not in her place as the bride. It seems she also knows that this wedding isn't really for her, but she probably just thinks the main roles are me and her father. With these thoughts flickering through his mind, Zeus entered the palace surrounded by a throng of nymphs. He felt a bit of regret. The reason the divine king knew of the prophecy regarding Thetis wasn't due to a divine premonition that suddenly led him to consult it at Mount Nysa. In fact, he was first attracted to the beautiful sea nymph before seeking the guidance of fate. As for the outcome, obviously, she was another Métis, so Zeus decisively abandoned her. Just as he had never approached Aphrodite, the divine king perhaps didn't care about issues of status, just as he never showed leniency towards his own granddaughter. But for some, he always kept his distance. Within the vast divine palace, Zeus walked into the main hall, flanked by a throng of nymphs. The gods who had arrived earlier were merrymaking and drinking wine. Seeing the divine king enter the temple, all gods came forward to pay their respects, and Zeus responded with a hearty laugh. He took his place on the golden throne prepared for him and spoke in low tones, sharing a joke with Hera beside him. Compared to before, the heavenly empress's complexion looked much better, and the collective wedding of the gods also lifted her spirits. Thus, Hera, quite out of character, took the initiative to pour Zeus a cup of wine, catching the divine king by surprise. Perhaps it was because he had too many illegitimate children over the years, but it had been a long time since Hera had shown him good grace. Time trickled away second by second, until even Apollo, who was on duty, arrived, and almost all the deities willing to attend the feast were present. The heavy temple doors slowly closed, making a loud noise. All gods realized the wedding was about to begin, and they turned their gaze towards the divine king and sea god Nereus, awaiting the opening speeches from both sides. This wedding is surely not just a mere wedding, just as Poseidon, who is currently looking at the high seat with a dark expression, intermittently glancing at his queen Amphitrite. However, this sea nymph, also a daughter of Nereus, seemed completely oblivious to what was happening. She was simply circulating among her former sisters, showcasing her current life. Among Nereus's children, there was no true god, so Amphitrite held the highest status among them. Let's begin, Hera. You are the guardian of marriage and should naturally preside over it. Without rising, Zeus signaled to Hera amid the gaze of all gods. Me. Surprised, Hera too thought Zeus was about to say something first, but she only received an affirmative gaze from him. The divine king now was not planning to do anything. And his focus was not on this wedding. Compared to this, even a mortal world festivity was more worthy of his attention. He was unsure if everything would go smoothly. Thankfully Zeus was prepared for both eventualities. Very well. Nodding in agreement, Hera slowly rose from her seat. It wasn't wrong for the heavenly empress to speak in place of the divine king. She corrected her expression, speaking in a calm and confident tone. My lords and ladies, today, at the invitation of the king of all gods. Quote. Squeak. The tightly shut doors suddenly opened, interrupting Hera's speech midway. The gaze of all gods converged on the intruder, a sea nymph, one of Nereus's lesser-known daughters. Some of them were about to chide her, but in the next moment, they all fell silent. Because everyone felt it, that familiar yet foreign essence of life. Hurrying through the palace, Onyx carried a silver tray in her hands. On the tray, a dazzling treasure sent out waves of resonance, just catching its aroma made Onyx feel the power within her surge and even grow slightly. This was due to her own insignificant strength, but it was enough to demonstrate the power of this legendary divine object. In comparison, the other, golden apple tree, that the heavenly empress Hera had grown from a branch seemed like a poor imitation. Even without tasting its fruits, Onyx could sense the vast difference between them. But at this moment, her heart did not have a trace of joy upon seeing the divine object. As a child of the ancient sea god, Thalassa, Nereus, and Oceanide Doris gave birth to 50 sea nymphs, collectively known as the Nereid sisters. Although none of them were true gods, still immersed in the affairs of the Olympian gods, they were not unfamiliar with it. So just now, when the discordant goddess Eris uninvitedly presented this golden apple before her, she felt excited, but upon seeing the black inscription on it, all joy turned into dread. To the fairest. This gift from Eris was meant as a celebration for the wedding host, so it should have been a gift for Onyx's sister Thetis. But without even thinking, Onyx didn't feel her sister deserved the title of the fairest goddess. She tried to decline the heavy token, but Eris didn't give her the chance. Now, unless Onyx kept the golden apple for herself, she had to bring it inside. Backquote, backquote, backquote. It's impossible to stay. Compared to Thetis, I dare not claim myself as the most beautiful goddess. Onyx bit her teeth, feeling the situation turning somewhat ominous. If this were just an ordinary wedding banquet or if it were a ceremony held by her Oceanide's family alone, receiving such a gift wouldn't matter much, but now all the gods were here. Her thoughts in turmoil, Onyx simply continued forward. At that moment, she even felt somewhat relieved that it was she who had received the gift. Just as among mortals there would occasionally be kings and demigods whose thinking was somewhat abnormal, Onyx did not doubt that if some of the sea nymphs had received this gift, they might have claimed it for themselves and could have truly believed themselves to be the most beautiful goddess. Step, step, step. Footsteps echoed in the corridor, with the grand doors right in front. Onyx took a deep breath and gently pushed open the heavy palace doors. As a frictional noise sounded, the great doors slowly opened. Quote, Here, I shall witness this sacred marriage, offering eternal blessings to both parties, wishing. The heavenly empress's speech was interrupted by the opening of the doors, as hundreds of gazes converged on Onyx, bringing with them a pressure heavy as mountains. For a moment, the sea nymph was at a loss for words until she saw the divine king on the golden throne. Gesture with his hand, and then the immense pressure suddenly dissipated. Daughter of Nereus, what brings you here to disrupt the wedding proceedings? Not far from the divine king's side, Zephyrus, the leader of wind gods, spoke loudly, while Onyx immediately held up the silver platter. Under the scrutiny of all gods, the existence of the golden apple was so conspicuous and so dazzling. Your Highness, esteemed guests, just now, Princess Eris from the Underworld has sent this gift. Taking a step forward, Onyx placed the golden apple tray on the table, feeling as if a great weight had been lifted from her. A gift has been sent, so where is she? A deity inquired, and Onyx explained truthfully. Princess Eris said she did not receive an invitation from the divine king, so after leaving the gift, she has already departed. There was an awkward silence in the room, even the goddess of Hearthfire's face flushed slightly. It was one thing not to invite a goddess, but Hestia indeed hadn't thought to invite her brother from the netherworld. Cough, cough, then leave the item here. Moanda, is this the golden apple you sent to Eris? With a light cough, Hestia noticed Onyx's nervousness and signaled that she could leave. She casually changed the subject, yet the goddess of life denied ever leaving a golden apple for a deity of the underworld. Perhaps it was something Mother Earth once gave to the two younger siblings of hers, though it was never acknowledged. It is said, however, that those true gods born in the netherworld do indeed have some connection with the two primordial gods. Some deity speculated, and this idea was quickly recognized. However, in the midst of talking, Hestia suddenly noticed that the sea nymph had not yet left the place. Do you have something else? She asked, and in the next moment, Hestia regretted it. Because under the gaze of the gods, Onyx hesitated for a moment, but still stepped forward and rotated the tray. The other side of the golden apple was then revealed to the eyes of all gods, accompanied by that line of writing. To the most beautiful goddess. For a moment, silence fell over the room, and Onyx quietly slipped out of the palace, but by now, no one cared about her departure. A single golden apple doesn't mean much, and an inscribed golden apple also can't prove anything. If it appeared elsewhere, at some other time, or in the presence of just a few deities, it would just be an ordinary apple. Even if it were a treasure that a goddess made for herself, it could even become a laughingstock. What determines the value of a trophy is not the trophy itself but its audience, and unfortunately, this wedding had gathered almost all the significant audience from the chaos world outside the primordial gods. Getting the golden apple inscribed with, to the most beautiful goddess, doesn't prove one's beauty. But by receiving it in the presence of nearly all the deities of chaos, that concept could indeed become truth. The primordial titans knew that, in ancient times, the lord of the spirit realm had once gained chronology. In this way, and the current deities also knew how Zephyrus, as a Western god, gradually became the leader of wind gods by taking over some of the powers left in the world by the god of meteorology. For women, what truly constituted beauty, character, marriage, strength, wisdom, appearance, or talent, had never been conclusively defined before. But when the chaotic gods together selected a winner, the authority she represented could truly serve as an interpretation of beauty. Even extending from this, if one could gather other deities associated with beauty to one's side, wouldn't it be possible to have the power to break the limits of a true god? Like the complete ocean, or the current divine king. No one knew, it was all speculation. After all, even if one acquired the definition of beauty, it didn't mean one could subdue other goddesses. But no matter what, it was a possibility, and with the endless lives of the deities, even the tiniest possibility had a chance of actualization. Bang! Hestia was the first to act, but not to seize the golden apple, but to destroy it. She had foreseen something, but she didn't want it to happen. Yet under her flames, the golden apple was not harmed at all and shone even more brightly in the fire. Tisk, interesting. Extinguish. With a light cry, the girl in the red dress suddenly turned, and a blue figure appeared behind her. At her command, Hestia's flames were immediately extinguished. Hecate ignored the concerned look of the moon goddess beside her, her gaze playfully scanning the deities present, especially lingering on Aphrodite and Hera for a moment. Don't be in such a hurry to cover your tracks. The most beautiful goddess, tisk tisk, does anyone want to claim it? C 612 to 196. This time it will be divided into 8 parts. Hecate, give it to me, this is not something to joke about. Frowning upon seeing the flame extinguished, Hestia couldn't help but step forward. The golden apple was hard to destroy, but not indestructible, the simplest solution being to have a being consume it. Although not likely any of the present gods were willing to eat the golden apple at this time, there was someone who could, like Zeus. However, the divine king just watched quietly, and in front of him, Hecate showed no signs of backing down. A blue figure emerged from her and solidified into another, Hecate, standing in front of Hestia, blocking the goddess of hearthfire completely. What is this? Do the gods possess an ability to double one's strength through an incarnation? Her expression slightly changed. Hestia had initially thought this was some special secret technique, but upon closer contact, she felt it was not the case. The opponent's strength was not inferior to her own, it was even stronger. In the gap where the two figures confronted each other, the red-dressed girl seemed oblivious to the increasingly tense atmosphere in the hall. She slowly stepped forward, picked up the golden apple, and then carefully examined it. She had always been curious. The golden apple is also a fruit, and as a fruit, it should be capable of being planted. However, from ancient times to the present, no one has actually used it for planting, they only saw it as an expendable item. What a pity, I can't take it away to plant it. Shaking her head somewhat regrettably, Hecate held the golden apple in her hand. Hestia, I can't give this to you, after all, this is the treasure, offered to the most beautiful goddess. Are you the most beautiful goddess? If you are, I could give it to you Tilda. She is not, are you then? Suddenly, a voice emerged among the momentarily silent gods. Hecate looked in the direction of the voice, then unexpectedly saw a familiar yet strange figure. The wife of Koios, one of the original 12 titans, the goddess of luminous from the lightless celestial body. Having received an invitation from the divine king, these two long reclusive ancient gods had briefly debated who should attend, ultimately Phoebe came in their stead. After all, the goddess of nursery Leto was their daughter, Apollo their grandson, so her participation in the wedding wasn't too unexpected. However, this was only the case for others. For Hecate, the other also had another identity. She was, nominally, her grandmother. Also the one most eager to send her into eternal sleep in the old days. Hey, laughing without a hint of amusement. For Hecate, whether it was the title or the faith from humans brought by the most beautiful goddess, even the symbol of beauty, none of it was of much use to her. Perhaps that was why no one had previously stepped forward to stop her actions. But Phoebe suddenly spoke such words. Could it be that she also wanted to be the most beautiful goddess? Do you want it? A hint of scorn flashed in her eyes as Hecate looked at the woman trying hard to conceal her desire. Perhaps being away from the world for too long, she even forgot how to act. It wasn't so overt. Since you want it, I'll give it to you then. Wait. As Hecate's voice fell, Hestia's expression changed immediately. The goddess of the magic net most likely wasn't interested in the golden apple. She knew that so when it fell into Hecate's hands, the goddess of Hearthfire wasn't so anxious, but Phoebe was different. However, the red-dressed girl didn't care what she said, she just gave a cold smile, then threw the golden apple towards Phoebe. The golden silhouette cut through the sky, attracting the attention of all the gods present, and the goddess of Luminous unconsciously stepped forward, ready to catch this unexpected gift. She hadn't anticipated that she'd actually receive this treasure just from asking a question. Perhaps Hecate was trying to mend their relationship, unexpectedly she was so obedient. Whoosh! As the golden apple flew midair, it suddenly halted. Phoebe's expression turned anxious, she reached out and felt another force pulling it. She looked up. Next to the divine king's golden throne, Hera's pale arm also stretched out, reaching towards the apple inscribed with words. Princess Phoebe, this is a wedding I am presiding over, it isn't very appropriate for you to snatch gifts offered by guests here. Hera, you are just the host of the wedding, the goddess's gift isn't meant for you. Besides, where do you see me, snatching? Could it be that you are the one who is snatching? Phoebe retorted without reservation. In today's assembly, apart from the divine king, whom she somewhat regarded, no one could intimidate the goddess of Luminous. Besides, her daughter and grandson were also here, whether Zeus would openly favor his heavenly empress was still an unknown. Read latest stories on novel.bin.com. I am the heavenly empress, the wife of the divine king, there is nothing in this world that doesn't belong to the divine king, and as one who shares his sovereignty, can taking my own things be considered, snatching. Her expression was calm, invisible majesty rising around her, thunder and lightning swirling around her body. Facing this scene, Phoebe's expression turned unsightly, not because of the other's words, but because of the other's strength. At least level 18 of divine power was necessary, and the specific sense of it couldn't truly be felt without engaging in actual combat. The opponent was nearing the end of the domain of profound divine power. Even if it was all due to faith, the strength was genuinely formidable. The trajectory of the golden apple began to shift towards Hera, little by little, inch by inch, yet resolutely. Then the next moment, another force overlaid on top of it, and the movement of the golden apple suddenly stopped. Aphrodite, what do you mean by this? With a slight turn of her eyes, Hera looked towards the goddess of beauty, who met her gaze without any concern. With just one look, both understood that neither would easily let go. Is there even a need to ask, Hera? As a daughter of heavenly father Uranus, the mistress of love and beauty in the world, what else could possibly deserve the title of most beautiful, other than beauty itself? Aphrodite stepped forward, her golden belt shimmering brightly. This was her divine artifact. In the legends of later generations, it briefly bewitched the divine king and was also a treasure that Heracles needed to obtain in his trials. It greatly enhanced the charm of the wearer, complementing the goddess of beauty perfectly. At that moment, all gods were captivated by Aphrodite's beauty, even Zeus couldn't help but take a few more glances. If not for her special identity, he wouldn't care that she was Ares' wife. What a pity. The divine king remained silent, and as Aphrodite's words concluded, the scene momentarily reached a deadlock. However, Hera was the heavenly empress after all. Over the years, even when outnumbered, she gradually gained the upper hand. As the position of the golden apple began to move again, unexpectedly, two more forces overlaid on top of it. One weak, one strong. By the moon goddess Selene's side, amid Phoebe's furious gaze, a goddess with a crescent crown and carrying a bow and arrow reached out her hand. Artemis smiled, not caring about the title of the most beautiful goddess, but just like she followed Hecate here, her sole purpose was to cause some trouble for the divine king. Of course, causing trouble for Phoebe was just as good. In their disdain for their grandmother's family, the attitude of the cousins was strikingly consistent. But hers was the potent aura, the weak one was interesting. At Poseidon's side, the sea empress Amphitrite also reached out her hand. Huh, what are you joining in for? Oh, I get it, just making an appearance, right? The tone was blunt, and the red-dressed girl in the middle feigned realization. This way, you two have competed for the title of most beautiful among powerful goddesses. And what if you actually won, right? You. Secretly grinding her teeth, Amphitrite dared not say anything. Hecate's usual domain also included the ocean, and Amphitrite had often found herself on the losing end in their encounters. As they spoke, 5 invisible divine powers crisscrossed, and with Amphitrite's participation, more goddesses' eyes flickered with light. Indeed, whether they could win might not be the most important part, but joining in itself was already a good thing. Over the years, the gods had discovered that creating major incidents in the history of human civilization or spreading epic tales could also bring about stable and consistent faith. Thus, the next moment, several more auras flew into the scene. The wife of the wind god, one of the Graces, reached out her hand. At the mother goddess's indication, the goddess of youth also extended a hand, standing on Hera's side. Not to be outdone, Aphrodite, named the goddess of harmony, also joined in, and watching the gods taking part, the goddess of agriculture Demeter hesitated for a moment, then joined as well. In an instant, various divine powers interlaced in the scene, and the converging strength grew stronger. Especially when a clear-eyed girl who had been watching for a long time also stood up and reached for the golden apple, the power in the scene seemed to breach a limit. The strength that could still be suppressed seemed about to erupt, with nearly a dozen potent divine powers overlapping, capable of blasting the entire Pontus Eutinus into the sky, and none of the participating gods would end well. However, none of the deities present worried about this, because the next moment, the divine king, who had been silent from the beginning, finally stood up. The order of sovereignty descended within this palace, the supreme power suppressing the entangled divine powers on the golden apple. The entanglement of power among the goddesses instantly severed, yet the atmosphere between them inside the palace eased not in the slightest. I knew it. Sighing, Hestia beside him felt somewhat helpless, understanding the reason for Zeus' prolonged non-response. This kind of dispute over beauty among the goddesses was not easy to intervene in, especially since those involved were either his wife, daughter, sister, or daughter-in-law. He must be having a hard time too. With this thought, Hestia glared at Hecate. Then the red-dressed girl ignored this, continuing to watch the drama unfold with a happy expression. All right, goddesses, I know you all want this apple, but this is not a reason for you to fight at a wedding feast. On the golden throne, the divine king, having halted the conflict, looked around, seemingly at a loss on how to handle the situation. As he spoke, Hera immediately looked towards Zeus. As that's so, then, my divine king, why not you decide the rightful owner of the apple? With spirited eyes, Hera watched her husband, curious to see what response he would give. C 613-197, the referee and the first assistant. Hera, I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. If Themis were here, I'd be happy to consult her opinion, and have her measure the true goddess of beauty with the golden scales. But if you ask me to make the judgment, I'm afraid I'd struggle to put aside my feelings for you all and make a truly just decision. Raising his hand, he suppressed the burgeoning power, and Zeus once again silently showcased his authority. Yet faced with Hera's request, the divine king resolutely refused. Whether he really had such deep feelings was one thing, but since he said so, it was considered true. Unable to make a truly just decision. Does that require thought? Zeus, shouldn't your heavenly empress be the most beautiful? Completely disregarding Zeus's evasion, Hera's words remained sharp, pressing step by step. Watching this scene, Aphrodite couldn't help but sneer coldly from not far away. Hera, pressuring the divine king is pointless, the authority of the gods cannot be violated, and you cannot change that. I am the goddess of beauty, a fact recognized by the world and affirmed by the law of the universe. As that's so, it's merely skin deep. If your understanding of beauty is merely superficial beauty, that only highlights your shallowness. Power and strength are the true jewels that adorn a woman, and marriage is their security. Then again, you have nothing but a face that passes muster, Hera retorted unapologetically beside the golden throne. She had long harbored dissatisfaction toward Aphrodite, and the feeling was mutual, the grievances between the two were not new. Once upon a time, the newly born goddess of beauty was married off to Ares under the overt and covert pressures of the divine king and his wife. Hera took this opportunity to confine her within the bounds of marriage, thus extending her own authority. But for Aphrodite, marriage was something she couldn't stand. Indulgent emotions, the freedom to rejoice, and the beauty stemming from her innate nature, these were the authority and instincts possessed by Aphrodite, born from the legacy left by the Heavenly Father. For her, marriage was like being caged, an intolerable situation. Thus, having not stayed compliant for long, the goddess of beauty quickly set herself free. Thus, having personally officiated her own son's marriage to Aphrodite, Hera felt her authority was defied, resulting in her harboring a dislike for the goddess of beauty. Even the followers in the mortal realm developed quite a bit of discord because of this. Aphrodite's devotees' favorite activity was to use their charm to attract the spouses of the heavenly Empress Church's followers, thus ruining their marriages and earning the favor of the gods. Conversely, if someone could resist such temptations and even persuade the devotees of the goddess of beauty to follow the right path, they would receive extra blessings from Hera. In short, the conflict between them was well known to all gods, and even the divine king found it a headache. However, due to power and status, Hera often had the upper hand. Yet this time, faced with the heavenly empress's taunts, Aphrodite clenched her fists. "You're forcing my hand." Mentally reciting this, she hadn't planned to use her big moves. After all, if executed, it might really be difficult to settle things down. However, to protect her face as the goddess of beauty from being trampled and to prevent Hera from usurping the concept of beauty, she could no longer care about the consequences. Without a sound, the golden belt at Aphrodite's waist suddenly emitted a glow that was hard for ordinary people to see. She picked up the goblet in front of her and took a slight sip. The wine trickled from the corner of her mouth, flowing down her neck and clavicle, seeping beneath her dress. Aphrodite turned her head and toward someone not far away revealed a radiant smile. "Ares, who do you think is more beautiful, me or your mother goddess?" Ah. His gaze became dazed, and in Ares's eyes, his wife, usually so aloof to him, was so incredibly beautiful. Her eyes were like the stars, her lips as sweet as nectar, her skin milky and smooth as bai. At that moment, she was the moon in the night sky, the sole deity among gods. Need you even ask, APH? How could the mother goddess possibly compare to you? Boom. Before his words fell, a great roar sounded from above, and the next instant, the entire divine palace shook. However, it was quickly suppressed by the power of the divine king. Beside the golden throne, Hera glared at her disappointing son, her eyes nearly spitting fire. Ares dared to speak these words in front of all gods. She could already imagine how, by admitting himself that Aphrodite's beauty surpassed the mother goddesses, this fact might become a laughing stock among gods for millennia. Enough. With a shout, Zeus could no longer stand by. Even as he spoke, he couldn't help but glare at Ares. This fool, how did he and Hera end up with such an offspring? If you had inherited even a tenth of my abilities, you wouldn't be so easily manipulated by Aphrodite. Sigh. Exhaling, Zeus's anger was only momentary. However Ares turned out, it was a minor issue. He had planned to let the existence of the golden apple ferment among the gods, but what he had never expected was that, even with the prohibition of physical conflict, the situation could escalate so rapidly. Fanning the flames. No need, this was just between Hera and Aphrodite. He couldn't imagine what else might happen if he let things continue. His gaze swept over Athena, who, though involved, still seemed to be somewhat aloof from the script. Zeus decided to hasten the proceedings. C 614-197, the judge and the first assistant _2. He was quite satisfied with the way things had developed. The effect of the golden apple in creating discord had exceeded his expectations. Although the two most intensely conflicted parties were not the ones he had intended, he should not hesitate any longer and proceed to the next step. Therefore, Zeus's face showed anger, as if he was infuriated by the dispute between the goddess of beauty and the heavenly empress. But upon glancing over at all the gods, he seemed somewhat helpless. "You are all my kin, my arms, or the highly respected ancient gods. For the sake of such empty honors, to confront each other with weapons, is it a wise act? It will only turn this matter into a laughingstock. Then what do you plan to do to resolve this?" As if enjoying the spectacle and not minding if the situation got worse, Hecate seemingly conjured a large pumpkin out of nowhere. She sat on the edge of the pumpkin swinging her legs, breaking off a piece and popping it into her mouth. "Since the goddess of the magic net is so interested in this matter and you seem not to contend for the golden apple, why not let you decide its fate?" A divine light flickered in his eyes as Zeus said this seemingly offhandedly. Many deities present changed their expressions upon hearing this, yet before they could voice their doubts, Hecate shook her head first. "Such a troublesome task should not be given to me, little Zeus. I am here to watch the fun, not to become the fun." Gazing at the heavenly empress and goddess of beauty who were previously at the height of verbal conflict, Hecate snorted with laughter, then lay back and in a flash, she disappeared without a trace. Unbeknownst to all, a hole had appeared in the center of the pumpkin, just large enough to accommodate one person. "Come on, Zeus, start your performance. Let's see what you plan to do. Since you are unwilling, let's drop it then." However, the arrival of the unwed goddess is indeed unexpected. Without being provoked by the insolent words, Zeus always seemed to have a high tolerance when facing Hecate. He looked towards the gods, making eye contact with each one as if to select a fair and impartial arbiter. Some showed anticipation, some preferred not to be involved, but in the end, Zeus did not choose any of them. After he shifted his gaze away from the last deity, the divine king revealed a smile. I know many of you wish to be the arbiter, but I must say, aside from Themis' golden scales, there is no deity here who can make all others feel that their judgment is fair and correct. Therefore, I have decided to leave this to fate. Raising his hand, the divine king's tricolored scepter appeared in his palm, and with a light wave from Zeus, a phantom image materialized midair. Through the phantom, the gods could see a temple, a worshipper kneeling in prayer, and as the image was elevated, they saw an entire city. He is one of my believers, one of my agents in the mortal realm. Not long ago, he prayed to me, preparing to dedicate a grand festival to me and my most beloved daughter, as an offering to the gods. Perhaps this is a revelation of fate. The mortal realm is selecting a hero of wisdom and justice, and the discord among the gods also requires such a person. Why not let this festival determine the ownership of the golden apple? The gods exchanged glances, and they found the proposal acceptable. No matter which god would act as the judge among them, none would be entirely convinced. Leaving it to a mortal might seem a bit frivolous, but they could use various means to ensure that the mortal's choice was not influenced by the will of the deities. As for the fact that this festival takes place in Athens, this could give certain deities an advantage, but Athens is not the sole domain of the Church of Knowledge, and the quality and quantity of the gathering foreigners may not be lacking, perhaps even superior. So be it. Still angry, Hera looked impassively at Ares and Aphrodite and then glanced at Athena, who was standing quietly to the side. After all this embarrassment, the golden apple must be hers. Whoosh. Rustle rustle. ... In the eastern lands of the mortal realm, a provincial capital was in the midst of celebration, while above the Pontus Euxinus, a wedding had come to an uneventful end. The couple who should have been the protagonists didn't even get a chance to speak. They could only shrink to the side, watching the gods who narrowly avoided a great war. And at the cliff's edge of the sky, at the ocean's end, the eternal stream of the circumterrestrial river flowed incessantly, never having paused for a moment. That was the circumterrestrial river, a symbol of the god of the ocean Oceanus's godhood, the revelation of the world's ocean currents, and the boundary between the ocean and the void. Here, an ever-moving temple stood towering amid the river waves. Apart from the god of the ocean and his spouse, almost no one could set foot here. However, today there was a slight exception. In the empty Great Hall, a third person had appeared at some unknown time. Have you made your decision? Oceanus, this is your last chance. In the past, you struggled for 3 ages, but you are very aware that without an accident, even if 3 more ages pass, you still couldn't succeed on your own. Standing in the shadows, or rather, wherever he stood surely became shadow. Erebus looked at the still hesitant ocean god, blandly stating the facts. You know, in this world, most people do not wish for others to have a smooth journey just because they themselves have suffered. On the contrary, if they've been rained on, they want more people to share in their misery. And in this world, there have only ever been 2 people who didn't have great powers but later came to possess them and are still active in this world. Laine and Zeus. And unfortunately for you, both harbor ill will towards you. Prince Erebus, there may have been some misunderstandings between us, but malice. Wasn't Laine's sword painful, or have you so quickly forgotten? With a faint smile, the Lord of Darkness continued. As for Zeus, I dare say, as long as he is divine king, you will never be able to rule the ocean completely, even if Pontus sleeps and Poseidon can't even withstand a blow from your hand. Quote. Lies do not hurt people, the truth is the swift blade. The scar from the sword that once cut through the long river was still fresh in the god of the ocean's memory, and Zeus's attitude toward him was almost completely transparent. Even though he had sent 2 daughters to Zeus, one devoured by him, and the other bearing the graces with him, Zeus remained vigilant against the god of the ocean. No matter what, the other party would never allow him to unify the ocean and stand beside his wife as the true supreme ruler of the ocean and water. Out with it, what do you want me to do? After a moment of silence, Oceanus finally asked. He had already made his decision. He would not be cannon fodder, no matter how enticing the other's words were, unless he could first touch a higher domain. Otherwise, he would do nothing. As for after he had reached that higher domain, whether or not he would obey was a matter for another time. C 615-198. The Lost, and the Long Silence. Half a day had passed and, within the palace of the god of the ocean, a secret discussion that no one knew about began and ended. Under the full effort of the Lord of Darkness, time and fate were isolated, and the law of all things could not be perceived. Everything here was concealed, even the present world itself could not detect what had transpired here. This secrecy exceeded even the time in the second epoch when the silver humanity was hidden, because Erebus did not understand the authority of the divine king, nor was he very clear about how close Zeus's current connection to the order of the present world was. Strictly speaking, he was actually looking for and creating allies for him, but just as Erebus had planned from the beginning, he didn't really intend to help Zeus, and the means he created for help were definitely not acceptable to the divine king. This was precisely why the Lord of Darkness had only started to act recently, because the unusual disturbances and passing of the world power had indeed made many things much easier, turning the impossible into possible. When strength poured into the outside, sensitivity inside naturally declined. It seems you've also realized what it is you need the most. By comparison, having two more enemies who don't get along isn't really a big deal. After all, previously, you didn't even have the qualifications to be an enemy. After the secret talk, Erebus finally revealed a satisfied smile. Having such a smooth start at the first stop after leaving Zeus made him feel quite good. He heard that mortals who believe in fate think a good beginning often brings luck to subsequent events. He wasn't very familiar with fate, but he was willing to believe it was a good sign. Maybe, just don't know in your plans, or rather, in your plans for the future world, what role did I play? The tone was somewhat self-mocking and even more weary between the expressions, which was not physical, but spiritual. Oceanus did not know whether his choice was right or wrong, but he was still moved by it. Only, thinking about the cost he had to pay made him hesitate. Erebus did not disclose his entire plan, but just the part involving him had already frightened the god of the ocean, which inevitably made him think of some things from a long time ago. Fortunately, that all had passed. Naturally, you would play the supreme ruler of the ocean and water, isn't that what you want? Besides, I didn't ask you to do anything, Oceanus. I just told you what I'm going to do. Whether or not you do it, I can't force you to commit. After all, you can change your mind at any time, and I can't possibly make you swear an oath on the Styx River. But my dear nephew, this world is only so big, and there are only so many positions. If you get more, someone else will inevitably get less. This is an unchangeable fact. So as long as you still think of moving forward, you will certainly make both friends and enemies, just as the path I've described to you. You may not do it, but you know, for every action you take, you gain a bit more strength, and once you're done, you'll obtain what you desire, of course, along with corresponding enemies. To go or not, it's all up to you. I'm not the sea god, and no other sea god has more of a unique opportunity than you. The tone was calm. The Lord of Darkness didn't really think highly of his indecisive nephew. In fact, from his choice to have many children and form numerous alliances, it was clear what kind of god he was, but he wasn't worried about a refusal. Conspiracies will be exposed, schemes will be uncovered, but at this moment, he is wholeheartedly considering his future path. As for the troubles that come with it, aren't they expected? There are no eternal enemies, Oceanus. As long as you can fulfill your wishes, you must make choices, or would you rather entrust your fate to Zeus? At least you should be grateful, you still have choices, unlike many others who have no opportunity at all. Perhaps. Sighing, the god of the ocean finally confirmed. I believe you can do everything else. As a primordial god conjoined with the world, your strength is beyond doubt. But one thing, I remember that in past years, only the divine king could imprison a deity in the abyss. How can you ensure that you can send a deity of the Olympian pantheon into Tartarus and then keep him there without Zeus releasing him? That's my concern now. As always, you can back out at any time, can't you? With a faint smile, Erebus offered no explanation. The abyss was also part of his plan, just not among the first few targets. Because his understanding of that place was not as deep. Since the third epoch, the abyss had resisted the entry of great divine power. But at least one thing he was more certain of. At the end of the second epoch, Cronus had forsaken everything and opened up a realm in the abyss, a strength he had seen implanted in the souls of silver humanity. And behind that a supporting hand was from Laine, so in some sense, the spirit realm and the abyss should be considered enemies. Over the years, those beings called demons had not been scarce in their dealings with the outside world. He had also learned some of the recent changes there. The abyss had nurtured life and even waged war with the realm opened by Cronus. These were unexpected yet within reason. Compared to the intelligence he had obtained, he further confirmed how the realm known as Hell came to be. It had stolen the strength of Tartarus. C 616-198. The Lost, and Long Quiet _2. However, This inversely proves a point, that the idea of opening up a world and drawing growth from the domains that originally belonged to the primordial deity is feasible. Cronus could only grapple with the mindless abyss, slowly devouring it over the span of time, because he was not, after all, a primordial god, but I won't be needing any of these. Of course, those are all matters for later. As for Erebus at the moment, he had made his preparations beforehand and had prepared for the aftermath, all that was missing was the right opportunity. That's enough for now, you still have plenty of time to hesitate. But I hope that by the time the opportunity presents itself, you have made your final decision. With this speech concluded, a sweep of his long sleeve, and the figure in the shadows vanished as silently as it had appeared, leaving the god of the ocean alone in his palace. He had no more to say, the rest, time would tell. ... Whoosh. In the space of a breath, from the outer sea to the inner sea, Erebus, having left the circumterrestrial river, spanned the vast distance and arrived above the Ionian Sea. The realm of humans was on a large island not far off, with a few ships sailing the nearby waters. However, the reason Erebus had come here was simply because it was near the Pontus Euxinus. Zeus was still there, and he wasn't in a rush to go over. After going over the preparations he had made once again, Erebus repeated the only condition he was missing. An opportunity. Or more precisely, his moment of death. Although he had been striving towards this, he really didn't know if Laine could offer this chance. Because the latter had never shown that sort of invincible, absolute power to make him feel undefeatable. The last time they confronted each other, they were separated by a negligible margin. So if it was just that sort of Laine, could he really come to kill him? No matter. I never put all my eggs in one basket. You and Zeus, or maybe the spirit realm and the mortal realm, one of you has to win, right? With a light chuckle, the Lord of Darkness felt the issue was not significant. Oceanus was just the first, but certainly not the last. He would gather all the allies he could find, one by one, and then create an opportunity, a reason, to measure the limit of Laine's cards, or if what was shown was all he had. If he truly possessed the power to confront by himself the lineup he envisioned, then there's no doubt such a world-conquering strength would be sufficient to tear him apart. Then, he would go, die, letting him continue the struggle against the law of the mortal realm. After all, the Divine King was one of the lineup, and he didn't believe that Laine, having cut down Zeus, could still live peacefully with the mortal realm as he does now. But if not, it wouldn't be a big deal. Numerous beings would eradicate all traces of the spirit realm abroad, each building up their hatred against Laine, with himself being only one of them. At that time, the Lord of Darkness would initiate the backup plan, and it's unfortunate that Zeus would be the unlucky one again. Thinking this way, it seems that no matter which option, the Divine King is bound to be unlucky. But that's normal. I am the master of the lightless domain, Laine is the master of the spirit realm, and even Cronus has now become the master of hell, but only the Divine King has never been the master of the mortal realm and destiny. Gazing at the colorful lights above the sea of Pontus Euxinus, Erebus felt some regret. He heard that Laine liked painting, it's a pity he wasn't good at it. Otherwise, he would definitely create a painting to commemorate Zeus, something like The Last Wedding, or The Feast of the Golden Apple, would be nice. That day will mark the end of the Third Era, and once again a Divine King will lose his throne. But who, I wonder, is destined to be the fourth generation Divine King? The year 852 of the New Chronicle, late autumn. The attention of the deities converged upon the sea, some were at a wedding, others were on the great river. Humans, meanwhile, gathered around Athens, awaiting a visual and auditory feast to determine the victor, whose name would be renowned throughout the world. As a year that would be etched into history, much like the later years of 1914 and 1939, it not only drew the attention of divine beings and mortals on a physical level, but also stirred ripples in the domain of fate. This moment marked the beginning of the great competition, with various colored placards being raised in the hands of tens of thousands of spectators in the trapezoid stands. 12 numbers emerged in midair, counting the number of each colored placard. It wasn't any form of image recognition, but a simple application of alchemy, as each person's voting placard was placed within a suggested mechanical structure. Only one could be chosen at a time, one must put down the previous before picking up the next, and a transmission structure allowed for an easy tally of how many placards each held aloft. Sitting in a secluded corner, Iapetus watched the lively crowd with interest. In the past, athletic and intellectual competitions were not uncommon, but those were the stages for heroes and sages, where spectators could only cheer and watch. But now, Athens' design had truly broken new ground. causing astonishment and delight for providing the chance to participate. Iapetus was no exception. He held a black placard with enthusiasm, joining the noisy crowd. Things really are changing day by day. I still remember when humans only knelt and worshipped each deity, their leaders hauling huge stones to build temples for all gods. Time flies, so many years have passed. The god of speech, Iapetus, was closely related to the birth of earliest humans, and his eldest son, Prometheus, was indeed the creator of the bronze humanity. Since he and Gaia created the silver generation, this ancient Titan god had been living in seclusion, not involving himself in the affairs of other deities. Even if his offspring were imprisoned or holding up the heavens, he simply looked the other way. Perhaps, though, a solitary life was too dull, and he often disguised himself as a mortal to experience life in their realm. As for this time, perhaps it was because he had once glimpsed fate that he felt an unseen pull, or maybe it was just because, as the god of speech, Iapetus enjoyed such debates of the wise. In any case, he had come to the mortal world again, to this very arena. He was in good spirits. Such days couldn't get any better. Suddenly, Iapetus's figure stiffened for a moment. Disbelieving what he had just seen. He took a deep breath and looked again towards that place. But this time, he saw nothing. Phew. Just a case of mistaken identity. It's impossible, anyway. The mother goddess has long been absent. How could she appear here? No, absolutely impossible. Quietly reassuring himself, Iapetus felt it was time to make himself scarce. As much as he wanted to watch this grand event, it was better to avoid trouble as much as possible. See 617 to 199. In addition to mathematics, there is substitute hitting. Excuse me, please make way, thank you. Trying to blend in as just another ordinary person, and even appearing quite polite, Iapetus rose from his seat and headed toward the periphery of the venue. The entire amphitheater, built against the mountain, had flat interstitial roads every dozen rows or so, which arced around and led to the exits to the outside world. However, at the moment, the spectators participating in the convention were very enthusiastic, with loud talking and standing not uncommon. This meant Iapetus had to inch his way out of the viewing platform, even having to continually greet acquaintances along the way. Yes, acquaintances. In fact, in Athens Iapetus not only had acquaintances but also an inherited aristocratic status, a not insignificant fiefdom, and a widely known reputation. To most of the upper class in Athens, he was seen as a scion of a family that had come from foreign lands and had been passed down through the generations for hundreds of years. As the contemporary family head, Mr. Elos, like his ancestors, was keen on books and paintings and enjoyed watching speeches and debates, although he seldom participated in them personally. Yes, I just suddenly remembered there's urgent business I haven't taken care of. Yes, it can't be postponed, and there's nothing I can do. With a helpless expression, after talking briefly with the last friend, Iapetus quickly walked outside. It was probably just a trick of the eye just now. Gaia shouldn't be here, but even so, he didn't want to stay even a second longer. Walking briskly and inconspicuously observing the distant crowd's movement, searching for his target within the bustling venue, the exit was just ahead. Bang! Accompanied by a dull thud, Iapetus staggered and nearly fell, the god of speech instinctively expressing his apologies. He hadn't been paying attention to his surroundings. Hiss. I'm truly sorry, I wasn't paying attention just now. The tone sincere. Were it any other deity, many would have been unable to contain their anger, but Iapetus didn't dwell on the incident. Even if there hadn't been a perceived presence of Gaia, he wouldn't remember such a minor issue. Since the ancient times, whether it was Iapetus, Prometheus, or Epimetheus, they had all frequently dealt with humans due to their comparatively weaker divine powers and consequently developed different personalities. For example, Prometheus once saw himself as a guide and protector, an attitude combining arrogance with benevolence, and Iapetus, who felt not much separated humans from gods, only a difference in strength. After all, he had also once been the weakest god, a time when even territorial gods did not yet exist. So, although he was eager to leave, Iapetus still apologized politely. I'm really sorry, but I have some urgent matters to attend to. I'm Count Elos, residing in Athens, and should you be free later, I would gladly host you for dinner at my home. Count Elos. The voice came from in front, and Iapetus nodded slightly. From the tone of the other, as the god of speech, he easily read out surprise, delight, contemplation. Strange, could this be someone who had heard of his name but not met him before? At least Iapetus was sure, he had never seen this young man before. But no matter who he was, he needed to leave quickly. Although it might be rude, I regrettably cannot stay long, I urgently need to get home. I understand your haste, Count Elos, but could I ask presumptuously? The young man looked up at Iapetus. Are you avoiding her? What? Startled, Iapetus looked up, and only at that moment did he sense something amiss. He followed the young man's pointing finger, and at the end of his gaze, the familiar auburn dress hem made him involuntarily hold his breath. Thankfully, the person did not look in his direction. To actually be here. So it wasn't a hallucination after all. But why would Gaia come to Athens? What was she here for? Was there something amiss with this convention? Moreover, besides that, with a solemn expression, the god of speech earnestly looked at the young man in front of him. He appeared to be around 20, possibly even younger. His handsome face and exquisitely made clothes seemed to suggest he was not lacking in wealth. However, at this moment, what attracted Iapetus wasn't these mortal creations, but rather, what lay concealed beneath. It was only then he realized, even if he had been tense from the fleeting glimpse of Gaia, it wasn't possible for him to bump into someone. One should know that although Iapetus had voluntarily blocked his divine figure, which although not strong among deities, was considerable in the mortal world, this did not include his perceptive abilities. It's not conceivable even if he was deep in thought, let alone if he was running with his eyes closed, Iapetus couldn't have simply bumped into someone. The only possibility was that this person had eluded his perception, had dodged the perception of a god. Even in the mortal world, this remained an incredibly incredulous feat. So who exactly was this presence, and had he realized the truth about himself and the woman he was pointing at? Who are you? What do you seek? Not rashly engaging in confrontation, not when there was major trouble nearby, and even if there wasn't, he wouldn't recklessly take such a risk. Iapetus simply asked sternly, while in front of him, the young man spread his hands innocently. Don't be so tense, Count Elos, I'm just a poet passing through Athens. Of course, you can also call me a prophet or a seer, it's all the same. In any case, it's fate that has brought us together here. Fate. Iapetus inwardly scoffed. He could confirm that the surprise this person showed when they saw him wasn't feigned. He genuinely didn't know whom he would encounter here. However, outwardly, he still pretended to believe. All right, let it be fate, but I must leave now. So you truly are avoiding her. But at such a close distance, do you really think you can escape her? The young man said with a smile. Quote. Maybe, but one must try it out, or do you have a better idea? Iapetus spoke gravely, knowing the truth in the other's words. No matter why Gaia had come, and why she hadn't noticed him yet, since she was here, he would inevitably be discovered due to their close proximity. Unless he swiftly left the city using the power of a demigod to create a safe distance, but that would only make being found happen sooner. I have no solutions, but under the guidance of fate, if you stay by my side, she won't discover you for the time being, as long as you don't do anything too conspicuous. Taking a couple of steps forward, the young man returned to his seat. He lifted his hand slightly and asked with a smile. So, do you plan to leave, or will you stay? Quote. What do you want me to do? Silence followed. For some reason, Iapetus felt as if he were recalling a distant past. There had been a prophet, then, who, in the name of fate, guided the normal mother goddess to do many things. But now, thinking of that incomprehensible aged figure, Iapetus took a few steps and sat down beside the young man. The air was filled with a fragrance. It seemed a girl had been here before, but where she had gone now was unknown. Don't speak as if I'm threatening you. I didn't tell you to come here, right? But I do indeed need your help with something. I wasn't completely sure before, but now I am. Nodding slightly, the young man asked, Count Elos, they say you're good at debating. Somewhat. Iapetus cautiously responded, unsure why the other had asked. That'll do. I don't care whether you, somewhat, know or not, however, the favor I need from you involves exactly that. Show your strength, and win a debate for me. Consider it your rent for staying here. No problem. When is the debate, and who is my opponent? After a brief consideration, Iapetus glanced at Gaia in the distance and agreed decisively. If it was just a debate, that would be nothing difficult for him. But what other debates were there besides this major event? Obviously, Mr. Elos, haven't you already guessed? The smile remained, and the young man pointed ahead. I'm talking about this one. Your opponent is right there on stage. After several deep breaths, Andrea sat in the contestant's seat. Thanks to that previous game, she had used her wisdom to defeat all who in this city thought themselves clever, and to this day, no one had unraveled the game's secret. Thus, she directly skipped the preliminary contests and secured a spot in the finals. At this moment, sitting beside her were some of the most renowned figures in all of Greece, and she, a 12-year-old girl, was about to compete with them. She had no idea how to win, so she aimed to lose as gracefully as possible. After all, she had already conquered the wisdom round. If she could achieve a decent result in the justice debate, she might just claim the champion status. Miss Leah, I must say, your game is profoundly mysterious. I've spent quite a bit of time on it these past few days, but sadly, once the difficulty escalated to the level of the 5 elements, I could no longer find a high probability strategy. With a sigh, Odysseus sat beside her, watching the voting on the selection of topics while chatting with Andrea. He was indeed enthusiastic, but the anxious little princess had no desire to entertain him at the moment. She only found the Prince of Qatar to be annoying, buzzing in her ear like a mosquito. That's normal, after all, only the wise can solve such puzzles. With a flat voice, Andrea decisively killed the conversation. Quote. Odysseus fell silent, his lips twitching slightly, then pretended not to have heard her earlier remark. He noticed that this mysterious Miss Leah seemed unfocused, and he didn't persist annoyingly. Perhaps she was calming her mind in preparation for the upcoming competition. He was looking forward to competing with her on stage once again. However, the young prince was unaware that the current Miss Leah was indeed preparing for the competition, just not in the way he imagined. Using mental strength, Andrea traced a bizarre, ever-changing rune in her mind and whispered softly. Hey, can you hear me, Avon, can you hear me? I feel completely out of my depth. You have to think of something fast. C 618-200, the arrogant and ignorant god of punishment. In the stands, each contestant had their own thoughts, while in the hall, the voting was drawing to a close. On the tally of votes, the black number 6 card, previously supported by Iapetus, had not been chosen. It seemed that the majority of the audience didn't favor this number, with the highest scoring being the 12 and 7 cards. The reason was quite simple. Due to the significant influence of their southern neighbors, and as the presence of alchemy constructs in Athens became more prominent, 7 became widely recognized as a symbol of mystery, transformation, and spirituality. It was even considered a lucky symbol by many. As for 12, that was influenced by traditional chaos culture. It represented perfection among numbers, as there are 12 months in the year and 12 principal gods on Mount Olympus. The support for the 2 questions rose at almost the same rate, each garnering tens of thousands of votes, filling the hall with silver and purple cards. However, as time passed, a victor was eventually decided. The surge in votes for card number 7 once outpaced number 12. Then, in a place imperceptible to ordinary people, a flash of lightning seemed to make the alchemy device used for counting stutter, and in the end, the 12th question won by a narrow margin. That was the Divine King. The sentence structure was questioning, but the tone was certain. Despite being subtle, the fleeting spark of lightning did not escape Iapetus's eyes. In this era, the all-gods could not descend their power or avatars at will. If it wasn't their true body present, they would need an adequate vessel or mediator to interfere remotely with a certain place. Without a doubt, the temple opposite the Parthenon temple, used for worshipping the Divine King, and the senior priest who came to Athens and brought about this great assembly, were the best mediators for Zeus. However, limited by the quality of the mediator and their connection with the Divine King, this descended power was somewhat conspicuous to those who were truly attentive. Yes, it must be His Majesty, the Divine King. Hey, a bit petty, isn't he? To interfere even with a number, to want to alter even a mortal's selection of questions. Laine, who had also noticed this event, shook his head slightly. He had not seen what the lightning did, but knowing Zeus, he suspected that the content of the 12th question had likely been covertly replaced. Quote. Whatever the Divine King does, he has his reasons. But you, who exactly are you? Without continuing the conversation, and with Iapetus's interlocutor showing blatant disrespect for Zeus, Iapetus felt an even greater headache coming on. First the figure resembling Gaia appeared, and then Zeus suddenly covertly altered the course of the human assembly. Just with these 2 points, Iapetus was certain of the assembly's extraordinary nature. However, compared to that, he was more curious about the identity of the young man he had inadvertently encountered. After all, Regarding the assembly and Athens, he was currently just an outsider, while the person beside him was even more elusive. The other party claimed to possess the ability of prophecy. Iapetus hadn't witnessed this. By discerning speech through his godhood, he could roughly confirm that Laine did not know they would meet here. But whether one can prophesy isn't important. After all, wizards who studied astrology, those who know how to dream walk into the spirit realm for divination, and some beings from the northern lands who belong to the fates know how to peek into the future. Even Iapetus himself had some skill in this. But, can, and, accurate, are different, and, accurate, and, can interpret, are yet another. Iapetus, who had once accidentally glimpsed a piece of the future in the spirit realm but only truly understood the content of the prophecy at the turn of an era, knew this all too well. Therefore, even if his godhood instinct told him the other wasn't lying, he didn't take this claim of prophet to heart. At this moment, he wanted to know whether the other party was simply an acquaintance or the chosen of someone's favor. Backquote, backquote, backquote. Do you come from the underworld, have ties with the Church of Eternal Night, or hail from the spirit realm? Iapetus spoke gravely, decisively narrowing down the options to three. The authority of a deity and a divine artifact are both absolute within their corresponding domains. Unless there is a drastic difference in strength between the parties, the gap in power is not enough to ensure victory in the domain the other excels in. The helmet of invisibility from Hades, the Eternal Night Church that worships Mother Night but hardly ever receives a response, and some entities from the spirit realm, these were the beings Iapetus knew possessed such authority. He was unclear whether these were all the entities in the world. Ever since the Mother Tree descended, Iapetus felt the world was becoming increasingly incomprehensible to him. None of the above. In response to Iapetus's inquiry, Laine gently shook his head. The reason I evaded your perception is not directly related to the three options you mentioned. Rather than focusing on that, you should quietly prepare for the debate. You should be able to win, at least, you shouldn't lose. Laine wasn't lying. His ability to conceal his tracks indeed had nothing directly to do with any of the three mentioned. Just as if Apollo were to grant a boon related to the sun domain, that would have no direct connection to Hyperion either. After verifying his own domain's authority, Iapetus reluctantly accepted Laine's explanation. Since he couldn't glean any more information, he turned his head to look towards the center of the venue. While the two had been conversing, the elder who had been presiding over the convention had already moved beneath the 12th topic on the floating platform. As the voting came to an end, with a gesture from him, the 11 unchosen topics instantly turned to ashes in flames. The remaining scroll moved from the corner to the center, as if pulled open by an invisible hand. It unfurled slowly in the air, revealing its content to all the attendees. Standing on the platform, the elder prepared to read the topic out loud. As the presiding judge of the assembly and the city of Athens' chief magistrate, Modia had of course seen all the topics. He remembered that number 12 was a discussion about a famous judgment that still elicited debate to this day. The content of this topic was to use that case as a basis to debate the laws and political systems of that country at the time, and whether the final judgment was just. If not, what would be fair? If it was, then how to refute the previous controversial speeches. In this process, each contestant's knowledge of laws, state governance, and history would be tested, and their exposition of justice would reveal their thinking. The debate doesn't necessarily require opponents to admit defeat. The key is to persuade the audience, as if the majority doesn't acknowledge something, it's likely not considered just. Ahem. With a light cough that echoed throughout the venue, thanks to the amplification runes, the elder signaled for the audience to be quiet. Facing the unrolled scroll, he prepared to recite aloud. Ladies and gentlemen, by unanimous vote from those present, the final debate topic for this convention is. What is this? Backquote, backquote, backquote. The expression on Modia's face changed abruptly, and he fell silent suddenly. At the same time, the venue erupted into commotion. Subconsciously, as the host of the competition, Modia was prepared to discard this question, but hearing the sudden burst of discussion, he instantly understood that it wasn't just him who had seen the content of the question. It was meaningless to change it now. At this moment, the only thing he could do was to continue the procedure of the contest and announce the content of the question. So it has been changed to this. Is it because, as trade with Silver Moon City has increased, many of the histories of old times have been passed down? So tell me, Count Elos, which side do you plan to choose for this match? Sitting in the stands and looking at the question scroll displayed to all spectators, Laine asked with a smile. Quote. Is it that conflicting for you? This kind of matter. surely you must support the gods, right? Quote. No, as a human, I naturally choose the side of humanity. Speaking in a deep voice, although he did not know whether this mysterious person had seen through his true identity, Iapetus still said so. If it were any other question, the god of speech, no matter how much time he spent with humans, would never betray his own class and say, I stand on the side of humans. Alas, the subject of this question was none other than his own son. Ahem, ladies and gentlemen, this is the final selection of content for our debate topic. On the high platform, Modia paused to steady his emotions, and amidst the tumultuous noise of discussion, he began to read slowly. Topic No. 12. Final. Since ancient times, both humans and gods have pursued fairness and justice without end. It wasn't until the divine king generously shared his authority with the 12 principal gods that divine justice finally emerged. However, in the ancient past, in the Bronze Age, the savage and mad god who held up the heavens, Atlas's eldest brother, the presumptuous and ignorant god of punishment, the fire thief Prometheus, incited mortals to deceive the gods, ultimately causing the celestial gods to send a great flood that wiped out the bronze humanity. Looking at the outcome, humanity was wiped out, but from the perspective of the process, there's a cause for every destruction. Please speak freely, under the watchful eyes of the gods, recount the fairness and injustice of this event. And based on the performance of the contestants in the debate, the audience will give the final judgment. At the same moment, in the contestants' waiting seats, Andrea covered her mouth with her hand, trying her best to hide her surprise at this time, while the reactions of the rest of the contestants were even more intense than hers. What kind of topic is this, discussing the justice and injustice of the destruction of the Bronze Age? This is simply a provocation of the deities. Quote. No, it's not, it's just a criticism of that fire thief. Regaining his composure from the shock, Odysseus immediately spoke up. And with his reminder, the other contestants also came to their senses. The content of the topic had said, under the watchful eyes of the gods, recount the fairness and injustice of this event. Although there's no strict requirement, surely no one would blame the gods. And as members of humanity, even if it was a subconscious choice, they likely would not blame humanity itself. So the question arises, if the gods are not at fault and humans are not greatly to blame, then who is the guilty party? Naturally, it would only be Prometheus. In recent years, due to Athens' pioneering trade with Silver Moon City, many texts from the Old Age had also made their way into the countries of humanity. Despite the reluctance to admit it, after multiple validations, many renowned scholars believe that those records are probably not fabricated, but indeed true events. Thus, regarding the destruction of the Bronze Age humans, many questions have arisen. Though it has never been a mainstream thought, it exists. Nonetheless, and many of the contestants present also harbor doubts about it. But now looking at it, which side will they have to take in the debate? If everyone sides with the gods, given the similarity of position, it's likely that the content of the debate will not be whether Prometheus is guilty or if he is the primary cause of bronze humanity's destruction, but rather, what crimes Prometheus committed, and whose listed crimes are the main factors. Shocking. Is it really so outrageous that my first time debating I have to face such a topic? Completely unsure of what to say, Andrea decisively sought help. Hey, can you hear me? Which side should I take? Regarding the fire thief's crimes, I don't know much. Quote. I can hear you, but I'll pass you over to someone else to decide what you'll say next. What? Startled for a moment, not expecting her lifeline to be switched, Andrea didn't have time to ponder it further. Soon, she felt that the voice emanating from the rune in her heart had become that of a middle-aged man. You must be Miss Leah on stage, correct? Sitting amongst the audience, Iapetus's face showed no emotion. Just as the topic states, the gods are just. They would not punish the mortal realm for a debate. So remember, our stance in the debate will be on the side of humanity. C 619-201, Abstention and Discourtesy. I abstain. I abstain. I also abstain. Her heart skipped half a beat as she sat in the seat designated for competitors. Andrea was shocked by the meaning of the voices in her mind. However, at almost the same time, three voices rang out one after the other from beside her. Looking towards the voices, the little princess recognized the owners of the voices. One was a scholar from Phoenicia, one was a well-known historian and jurist from the city of Athens, and the last one was a prince from Pislacius. The reasons for the first two abstaining were not surprising, for Andrea had heard them express doubts about the historical records before. They believed that the fire thief, Prometheus was actually a respectable true god, contrary to what the official scriptures of Olympus recorded. As for the last one, although he was also a prince, he was not as renowned as Odysseus of Ithaca. However, just from the name of that country, Andrea knew why he abstained. As one of the oldest nations of humanity, Pislacius was now just a small country with a few cities, rarely favored by the gods. According to folk rumors, this was because one of their kings had proclaimed that the divine king had abducted his daughter, though no evidence could prove this to be true. Even though many later believed it might be true, it did not affect the decline of the kingdom, nor the royal family's subtle rejection of the deities. The reason these three abstained was probably that they neither wanted to betray their own convictions by speaking at the convention, nor did they want to attract the censure of the deities for it. After all, while speaking openly in such a debate, the gods might not punish a player directly for their speech, but that did not stop them from acting indirectly. It was once so in Thebes, at the wedding of the goddess of harmony and Cadmos, when the goddess of beauty, Aphrodite, gave her a beautifully crafted necklace and silk veil as a wedding gift. However, whether it was because she was furious about her daughter marrying a mortal or not, that necklace and veil seemed to carry a curse, as everyone who wore them met with misfortune. Wow. As the three finished speaking, the auditorium buzzed again. There were no amplification devices installed at the seating area for the competitors, but standing here were essentially no weaklings, each capable of making their voice carry further with little difficulty. As soon as the topic was announced, 3 people abstained, which was extremely rare. The 3 of you, I heard you just now expressing the intention to withdraw from the competition. In the center of the venue, the elder was taken aback upon hearing this, but he quickly understood the reason and asked officially. Do you assure that the act of withdrawing from the competition is out of your own free will, without being subjected to any external coercion or intimidation? If you choose to give up, there will be no possibility of changing your mind later on. Of course. The Prince of Pislacius spoke, and the other 2 nodded in agreement. In that case, the 3 of you may choose to stay and watch the following matches or leave early. Ignoring the clamorous voices, the elder Modia signaled to those who had withdrawn to make their own choice. He slightly raised his hand, and immediately, melodious music resounded to the left and right of the stands, under the influence of the array, overshadowing the noisy discussions. The central floating platform then trembled slightly, splitting into several smaller circular platforms, which moved across the sky like ships on the sea and landed in front of the remaining competitors. Now, please take the stage. Exchanging glances, the remaining competitors stepped forward, Andrea among them. She was not the only female competitor, there was also an old woman with white hair. As the floating platform moved again, the competitors reached the center of the auditorium, in sight of everyone. Your identities need no introduction, as you are either renowned across all countries or have recently proven your abilities in Athens. Everyone knows you and looks forward to your performance. Now, let the competition begin. In the name of Athena of wisdom, may you all excel. Originally, there was a long segment intended to introduce the guests, the history of Athens, the reason for organizing this convention, and then to introduce the competitors' identities and fame individually, but Modia was more interested in knowing about the sudden change in topic, and who had altered it. So he simply skipped those unrelated matters and directly announced the start of the competition. According to the rules of a debate, at the start of the competition, the first thing all competitors had to do was to state their views. Quote. Since the competition has already started, let me be the first to speak. The venue fell silent for a moment, then Odysseus smiled unaffectedly. He had nothing to be concerned about, and did not mind being the first to speak. As for his viewpoint, that went without saying. As one of the many descendants of the divine king left in the mortal realm, even though generations had passed, he could not possibly oppose divine court's speech for mere rumors. So, esteemed audience, esteemed friends sharing the stage with me, beautiful ladies, and all gods, both of heaven and earth. As the Prince of Ithaca, I am honored to stand here to share my opinions, to explicate my views. Here, I thank the priest who has traveled from afar, as well as King Theseus of Athens, for they have given us this opportunity to gather here. Therefore, I must do my utmost to demonstrate my eloquence, in hopes of adding a trivial amount of brilliance to this grand event. I have heard that among all the wise monarchs in all countries, there is no one who does not clearly reward and punish. A ruler like King Theseus would certainly punish those who break agreements and penalize those who commit crimes, for only in this way can the interests of those who adhere to agreements be protected, and the law-abiding citizens not suffer. This is a universally accepted truth, a justice that does not change with time, and this is my view. I view the disaster of the Bronze Age, the destruction of the Bronze Age, as a monarch's punishment for the unfaithful, a ruler's sanction of the guilty, which is reasonable and beyond doubt. Those who steal must be imprisoned. Those who do not abide by the rules must be judged according to the law. This is a rule that should be fulfilled by everyone from aristocrats in city-states to the divine monarchs of all gods. If such actions are considered unjust, what then is considered just? Standing on the high platform, Odysseus slowly stated his standpoint, then concluded with a rhetorical question and bowed in respect. In fact, what he said was precisely the summary of the ideas quietly promoted by the divine court over the years. The bronze humanity had violated the divine human covenant. Their destruction was naturally lawful and justifiable. Prometheus stole fire, which was against the law, so it was only right that he be imprisoned. It was hard for anyone to question this, as they had already sensed that the crux of this debate would inevitably become a critique of which of Prometheus's crimes was the most severe. In this era, openly criticizing deities was rare, except of course when they were guilty. Thus, following Odysseus's opening, the next contender also stepped forward to present his viewpoint. Clap, clap, clap. The mortal debate had just begun, but naturally, the audience was not limited to the mortals in the audience. Whether it was Iapetus or other deities present at the scene, they all silently watched this grand assembly. In a palace beneath the Pontus Euxinus, the god of the west wind gently clapped his hands in support of the speech of Odysseus he saw in the phantasm before him. With the authority of the divine king and the temple built on the Acropolis along with its followers, everything happening at the venue was reflected in this palace, and Odysseus's speech was naturally conveyed synchronously. Regarding his speech, the deities present basically had no objections. Most of them had no connections with Prometheus, and even if they did not believe that divine court was wrong in this matter. Even Hestia thought Prometheus should not have taught humans to deceive the gods. Therefore, the speech of the prince of Ithaca naturally pleased the deities, and even the tense atmosphere caused by the golden apple eased a bit. Of course, only a little bit. Respected sovereign, it seems your lineage is still so extraordinary, that even though 3 generations have passed, it can still produce such distinguished offspring. If it weren't for the haughty nature of mortals, who lose their reverence and self-knowledge as soon as they approach the divine, I'd even suggest you invite him here to share a drink with all the gods, Zephyrus said with a smile, while the divine king laughed modestly for a few moments. He had already forgotten which branch of his bloodline Odysseus was from, but the latter's performance was quite acceptable. Moreover, the divine king could see his thirst for wisdom and fame. This candidate could potentially become a champion. He would make the right choice. Of course, as the god of West Wind had mentioned, although his performance was good, sharing a drink was out of the question. Since Tantalus's incident, the gods had learned another lesson, which in another civilization's words would be called, familiarity breeds contempt. The more gods interact with mortals, the more they generate undesirable thoughts and commit intolerable acts. Thus, they no longer allowed beings incapable of eternal life to come close to them, even their own offspring. The 4th generation of humans grew up under the teachings of gods from the moment they were born. Indeed, unlike the irreverent and unruly Bronze generation, Zeus nodded in approval as he glanced to his left. A young girl in a knee-length dress, sitting upright and composed, was calmly watching the phantom before her, as if this grand assembly was not happening in her mortal sanctuary, and as if she had not been affected by the previous issue with the golden apple. Inwardly, if this were not his daughter but a son, if he did not possess power surpassing all deities, Zeus might not have been able to tolerate her existence. Even deep down, the divine king felt a slight apprehension. But reason, after all, triumphed over vague premonitions. Zeus did not feel that Athena, being a goddess, could truly threaten him. However, if he could take this opportunity to teach her a lesson along the way, it wouldn't be a bad idea either. She needed to remember who her father and king were and not spend her days in the stars, mixing with those unruly deities. Athena, my most illustrious daughter, I changed the topic of the competition without your consent, and that was indeed my fault. However, if one were to choose a mortal to judge deities, it would naturally require a competition of judging another god to demonstrate his capability. Yet, since the topic was replaced by me, I promise you, no matter what speech appears in this competition, I will not hold it against Athena. Then I shall thank your majesty for your kindness. With a slight smile, Athena seemed not too concerned about this. She nodded gently and then continued to watch the mortals speak at the venue. By this time, several individuals had completed their opening statements, and only 2 figures remained in the center. C. 620 to 202 Human Justice. Acropolis, the central area of the venue outside the city. Under the gaze of the audience, one debater after another expressed their views from different perspectives. However, as anticipated beforehand, no one denied the decisions of the Olympian gods. The fourth generation of humans had never seen Prometheus. There were only a few legends passed down at sea. It was said that fleets lost in whirlpools might receive guidance from the prisoner to return to the human world, but rumors are just rumors. The same was true for bronze humanity. Expecting modern mortals to empathize with the previous generation of humans with whom they had no blood relation was clearly unrealistic. Most people simply took the perspective of an observer, rationally considering the issue. Quote. So as I said, in legend, the woman who brought disaster, Pandora, opened Pandora's box again in defiance of the deity's command. She also proved with facts that not only did the males of the Bronze Age break their vows, but females did the same, and perhaps it was in their nature. Such humans deserved destruction, and compared to reducing sacrifices, stealing divine fire, this was indeed the final straw that led to the destruction of the Bronze Age. Pandora's existence fully proved that this generation was beyond redemption, and destruction was their only fate. On the platform, another participant spoke of his philosophy. Unlike the previous few, he chose Pandora as his entry point. This first woman created by the gods opened Pandora's box, bringing chaos, turmoil, and disease to the earth, and 3 months later, the deity descended a great flood to wipe out the world. This was no doubt a different perspective, but a well-substantiated one that also garnered wide approval from the audience. After a round of enthusiastic applause, the middle-aged man with short hair bowed politely and then returned to his original position. At this moment, the only one left who had not spoken was Andrea. Taking a deep breath and appearing composed, the little princess took a step forward, and her floating platform moved into the center. The gazes of tens of thousands converged on her. Many recognized her. This was not only because the Leah's game had become increasingly widespread but also because of her appearance. Regardless of the era, there are always those judged by their looks. Being beautiful is an advantage in itself. Quote. Mr. Elos, I hope you are as formidable as you claim to be. Andrea prayed inwardly but immediately remembered that cheating was not something Athena endorsed. Now she was openly cheating at a conference dedicated to the goddess. If not for Laine's previous assurance that it would go undetected, and her own hope for Athens to win, she wouldn't have come here. Ladies and gentlemen, fellow participants, be you commoner or aristocrat, deity or elf, I am honored to discuss this ancient history with you. Just now, the points of view have been clearly expounded by others, and the approval of all gods was also clearly shown, but forgive me, under the gaze of the goddess, for expressing a just speech, I must dissent from your views. Her voice was not loud, but with the help of an alchemy array, it reached the entire venue. As a princess, Andrea had some expertise, and at least in demeanor and tone, she did not seem to be reading from a script. This lady, may I assume that you mean to say that, in your opinion, the gods' actions during the Bronze Age were unjust? Suddenly, another voice arose from the contestants' area. However, the next moment, a red light shone from the platform he was on. Following this, the previous presenter calmly spoke. Mr. Knows from Olympia, during the opening stage, questions, counter-arguments, and debates are not allowed. After the last participant has expressed their stance, the time for free discussion will come. Each participant has the right to express their opinions fully and independently, so now I am issuing a warning to you, and if you engage in similar conduct again, I will declare your disqualification and expulsion from the venue. Quote. I apologize, Miss Leah, I misspoke. Bowing slightly, the contestant named Nose apologized towards Andrea's direction, and Andrea nodded in acknowledgement. No harm done. This isn't the time for a formal debate, but since you asked, I can confidently answer you. Regarding what occurred during the Bronze Age, I indeed believe that the gods were unjust. As for the reasons, allow me to elaborate. Head held high and standing in the center of the venue, Andrea looked at the increasingly restless audience, her heart's runes flashing incessantly. For some reason, through those passages of texts, Andrea seemed to sense a touch of helplessness and anger. These were not emotions displayed openly but those hidden within the heart. Previously, a lot has been said about the justice of Olympus. You mentioned that those who violated agreements should be punished, those who breached the laws should be disciplined. This is unproblematic and accepted by people. But if the destruction of bronze humanity is deemed such punishment, then I fear it does not conform to the justice you speak of. Over the years, I have read historical books, appreciating the wisdom of the ancients. In the history spanning thousands of years, I have seen many ancient heroes, both wise and tyrannical kings. Since ancient times, the assessment of kings has also been unanimous. C 621 to 202 Human Justice _2. Facing a war of injustice stirred up by an enemy nation, a benevolent monarch only defeats the opposing army, captures their king and aristocrats, and spares their soldiers and servants. They win over the people of the enemy nation with virtue, using their own character to halt the wars of the world, whereas those who defeat the opposing army, execute the king and aristocrats, and stack the heads of the enemy soldiers into mounds to deter the disobedient. They are tyrannical kings. They subdue bandits with the bodies of invaders, intimidate nations with the swords in their hands, and make the heroes of the world restrain their ambitions, daring not to raise arms in the mortal realm. As for those who kill the enemy nation's soldiers, allow the pillaging of cities, and put to death 1/3 of a city's population, seizing all food and wealth, such acts can only be carried out by cruel kings. They subdue their subjects with fear, maintaining their rule with strength. Consequently, rebellion persists, and the heroes of various nations vie to draw their swords, proving their martial prowess. History is not only of men, but of gods as well. In the ancient years, the first divine king ruled the world in such a manner, and he too was eventually overthrown by his offspring. As for human kings like this, they have seldom been seen throughout history, and not one of them met a good end. Such brutality is rare in the world, yet the destruction of the Bronze Age was far worse, making the former pale in comparison. Even after searching through histories, I have never heard of a king who killed the enemy nation's king and aristocrats, slaughtered all the invading soldiers, and put their entire population to the sword. Blood turned rivers red, and civilization was reduced to rubble, an intolerable act for all life, yet it was precisely the disaster brought down by the gods, the suffering the people of the Bronze Age endured. The act of deceit is unjust, and those who break promises should be punished, but besides the forethinking god and priests who committed all this, what wrong did the rest of bronze humanity do? Even if the gods were angered by this and sent them famine, plagues, and torrential rains, it could be seen as the act of a cruel monarch. However, a flood cascaded over the earth from east to west for 7 days and nights. Not a single life on the earth went unscathed, even the birds in the sky fell into the vast ocean for lack of a place to land. When all gods deprived mortals of life, whether devout or faithless, whether beasts or insects, can such an act truly be called just? The voice echoed above the assembly. At first, Andrea was merely reciting by rote, but gradually, she began to persuade herself. Indeed, in recent years, wars between city-states and kingdoms have been common, and cruel kings have emerged from time to time, but to kill off an entire nation's lives, leaving not a single human or animal, such an act had never occurred, even by the northern barbarians who performed blood sacrifices. If the gods of Olympus committed such an act, then it would be a behavior even more ruthless than the cruelest of kings in the mortal realm, so how can such actions be called just? For a moment, the assembly fell silent. The first phase of the conference had ended, and the debate among the competitors could begin. Yet for a while, no one stood up to refute on the high platform. So, Miss Leah, this is your opinion? Yes. Andrea nodded in response to the words, while on another platform, Odysseus's voice remained steady. She didn't expect to convince the wise ones present with just a few sentences. This was only the beginning. Now, she was ready to witness the wisdom of others. In that case, I will speak frankly. Your speech was indeed splendid, but it also contained quite a few loopholes. Odysseus remarked with a smile, his words unapologetic. Although he indeed harbored fondness for the Miss Leah before him, for Odysseus, love was not something to be obtained by begging or making concessions. Beautiful lady, just now, you compared Prometheus to a king waging war, his students and priests to aristocrats, bronze humanity to the citizens, and divine court as another nation responding. This certainly is a fitting metaphor for the fire thief inciting the priests of that time to break their agreement, deceiving all gods, but it contains an undeniable flaw. All that you have spoken of concerns wars between kingdoms and between mortals. Thus, the kingdoms of humanity wage war against each other without annihilating the enemy nation to the last. The conflicts among mortals do not exist to eradicate an entire race. Yet I have heard that humans cannot comprehend the actions of beasts, hence the fish in the water devour their own offspring, and mortals view this as evil. Humans also fail to understand the behavior of insects and predators, so when the mantis consumes its own mate, mortals cannot accept such brutality. This is how humans regard beasts, but isn't it the same way gods view humans? What mortals consider cruelty may not be seen as cruelty by the gods. These matters are not comparable, as they are conclusions drawn from different perspectives. An argument built upon a flawed premise will invariably lead to a flawed conclusion. Being unable to recognize the essential difference between gods and humans naturally leads to an inability to discern justice and injustice. Therefore, Miss Leah, your earlier speech likely has no significance. With incisive and forceful rhetoric, Odysseus had not disputed the cruelty of the divine king, but rather suggested that comparing gods and mortals was meaningless on account of the gap between them. Debate is like this. Often, there is no right or wrong in the topics argued by both sides, and sometimes there is, but what truly decides the outcome is whether each party's perspective is rigorous, whether it forms a coherent logic, and whether it captures the flaws in the other party's arguments. For a moment, the atmosphere in the arena seemed to shift, and the disturbance caused by what could be deemed Andreas' blasphemous remarks had settled. Faced with the counterattack, Andrea was eager to retort, but she temporarily could not find how to counter the argument of divine and mortal divide. After all, no matter what she said, the other party could always reduce it to, as a mortal, how can you understand the thoughts of a god? However, Andrea felt far from discouraged by this situation. After all, she was not very familiar with debating from the start. Her true means of response still lay in the voice that rose in her heart. Very well, Prince of Ithaca, you have evaded my question and attempted to deal with it by claiming, this question should not exist. You think that mortals cannot understand gods, just as they cannot understand the birds and the beasts. Although I do not agree with your statement, let's proceed with your viewpoint. With a courteous glance at the tens of thousands of spectators present, Andreas' voice remained steady and unhurried. Just now you said humans cannot comprehend birds and beasts, hence human nature and the nature of birds and beasts are completely different. Humans cannot understand gods, so human behavior can also differ from that of gods. Yet humans praise the diligence of bees, and use this to compliment themselves. Humans denounce the brutality of devouring offspring, and thus criticize the behavior of predatory insects. Every judgment in this world is based on one's stance towards others, and so-called fairness also stems from this. To evaluate right and wrong from an individual's stance may be biased. To judge right and wrong from the stance of a city can be fair to the people of that city. To assess right and wrong from a nation's perspective can be fair to that nation. To appraise right and wrong from the perspective of humanity, then to humans, this judgment is just. This great assembly is being held in Athens, bringing together the elite from various nations to honor the deities with their wisdom. This showcases the wisdom of man, not the wisdom of gods. This is a debate held by humans, not a debate between humans and gods. If you do not measure justice by human standards, but demand that it be assessed from a non-human standpoint, isn't that contradictory to the very purpose of this assembly? Now, back to the point I was initially making. Odysseus, Prince of Ithaca, the wise youth among mortals, please tell me, assuming that you, I, and everyone present cannot understand divine justice, then from the perspective of humanity, do you approve of the destruction of the Bronze Age as aligning with human justice? The voice was calm. At that moment, a breeze began to stir in the clear sky, clouds obscured the sunlight, but Andreas' gaze remained bright. Discussing justice beyond mortal understanding at a debate unique to humans is pointless. Justice is relative. If one were to consider divine justice, wouldn't one also have to consider the justice of plants, insects, and fish? Being human, one should ponder issues from the perspective of humanity. In this case, the previous challenges by Odysseus naturally fell apart. C 622-203, Guidance. The vast venue was filled only with the sound of the wind. The clouds gathered on the horizon, seemingly heralding the imminent rain, but at this moment, no one in the venue paid it any mind. This was not only because of the speeches the two contestants had just made but also because they believed in the technology of Athens. Rumors had it that in distant Silver Moon City, the locals had mastered a magical technique called maze lock, which could locally tweak the strands of the magic net to form a semi-permanent huge barrier, thereby warding off disasters and manipulating the weather. Of course, Athens lacked such capability, and even the maze lock of Silver Moon City was a unique case, purportedly crafted by the goddess of the magic net for Artemis, who had once resided there, or it was said to be her gift to the first generation of wizards. In any case, the existence of maze lock was irreplicable, but conjuring a rune barrier to fend off a downpour was not particularly difficult. It was unfit for military use since its coverage was too vast, thus failing to block the sharp lances of knights effectively. But if it were to ward off rain, it seemed quite effortless. Indeed, Compared to a glamorous appearance, the brilliance of the spirit is truly captivating, and how many in this world possess both? Ignoring the others, Odysseus had now set aside the rest of the contestants. These intellectuals from various nations might indeed be capable, but the conference had been convened all too hastily, and they might not necessarily represent the pinnacle of their respective nations. With their level of competence, how could they compare with him? Fortunately, he still had opponents. Previously, Odysseus had felt regret for the 3 contestants who had dropped out, but now, he only sensed the challenge. Miss Leah, although we stand as opponents on the debating platform, I must applaud your recent speech. However, regarding your last questioning, my response remains unchanged. Raising his voice, standing on the debate platform, Odysseus's voice echoed throughout the venue. You asked me, from a human perspective, is the destruction of the bronze humanity justifiable? But in fact, even when referring to human customs, cognition, and history, I still believe there was nothing unjust about the destruction of the Bronze Age. The reason lies within what I outlined at the very start. First of all, I appreciate your acknowledgement of the differences between gods and humans, admitting that the relationship between humans and divine beings is as incomprehensible as that between humans and wild beasts. Such nobility of character, willing to accept speeches unfavorable to oneself, but I must say that the disparity between gods and humans is even more profound than that, and this is precisely the reason why the destruction of the Bronze Age was just. I've heard that skilled craftsmen will use the most suitable tools, so a caster's hammer must suit the strength and material, changing as they age. Outstanding musicians will use the most fitting instruments, thus a poet's harp strings are continuously tuned, altering material as per personal preference. People do not blame the caster for discarding an old hammer, for the hammer was made for him, and he has reasons to recast it. People do not blame a poet for changing strings, for the strings exist for their resonance, naturally possessing the right to replace them. Isn't the greatest disparity between gods and humans exactly this? Deities differ from other living beings in their immortality, but isn't their superiority over other lives the fact that all spirits in the world are their creation? Humans differ from beasts, yet humans can only kill them. Gods differ from humans, but divine beings can create life. From the ancient era, everything capable of movement in this world was created by the gods. Everything that can grow comes from the hands of the deities. You use human justice to judge deities, then naturally the same standards must apply. If something is permissible for humans, then deities can practice it without reproach. Thus, if humans discard an imperfect creation to make a perfect one, such actions are blameless. Deities forsaking an imperfect creation in anticipation of a perfect one should likewise be acknowledged. The imperfect bronze humanity was obliterated, and our generation was born. This is the very proof that our generation is superior to the Bronze Age and that the deities' actions were just. The obliteration of humanity was not the goal. Replacing decayed creations with superior ones is the root reason. You measure divine justice by human standards, but have you forgotten that the birth of the bronze humanity stemmed from the divine king's will, and that the decadence of the Bronze Age's humanity is inseparable from Prometheus's misguided teachings? Loud and powerful, Odysseus once again countered Andrea's speech, this time fully elaborating on one of his key points. Andrea had used human justice as a standard, believing that human debates naturally required measuring everything by human dimensions, but Odysseus pointed out another key aspect, which is that in this mythic world, humans were not naturally born but, like other lives, were created by gods, a fact undeniable by anyone. The inequality between creator and creation indeed exists, even from a human perspective, one cannot forcibly assume there's no difference. Furthermore, with this argument, Odysseus artfully avoided a potential criticism, which is, if the gods plan to destroy the 4th generation of humans equally, would you consider it just? See 623-203 guidance_2. Because the divine king did not want another god who created humans, like Prometheus, to emerge, he did not arrange for a deity to personally create the 4th generation of humans but instead used humans as intermediaries. Therefore, Odysseus's argument may apply to the Bronze Age but not to their generation. There was a somewhat sophistical inclination in this, but that's just the nature of debates. They are not about truly clarifying the issues but about expressing one's views and showcasing artistry in language and individual talent. Once these words were uttered, the situation in the venue stabilized once again. However, nobody thought that Andrea would be stumped by this. The player, who had risen to fame like a comet, had proven her capabilities, and everyone was anticipating her response. And true to expectations, under the watchful eyes of the audience, Andrea remained as calm as before. As before, although I don't agree that creating equals possessing, especially when the creation possesses intelligence and the ability to think. Considering humans still cannot create life with intelligence, let's follow your train of thought for now, she said. You say gods made humans, so it is natural for gods to wipe out the old humans, just like humans replace old tools, but a person with integrity only deals with their own tools and does not stretch beyond another's arm to meddle with someone else's tools. A cultivated person will not be shamelessly unapologetic for causing someone else's property to be destroyed because of their actions, she continued. You believe that since God created all spirits, God naturally has the right to replace them, but did the lives of the Bronze Age truly belong to Olympus? She asked. On the expansive stage, Andreas' voice continued to carry. This debate about justice, it seems, would not be easily settled any time soon. The clouds grew thicker, and the air became moist. In the grand venue, the speakers' words, amplified by alchemy tools, reached every corner. Besides Odysseus and Andrea, other participants also spoke up from time to time. Given the level of humanistic development in this era, this was undoubtedly a rarely seen debate extravaganza. The audience gradually moved past the shock of Andreas' views and began to enjoy the thrust and parry on stage. In a corner of the stands, far from where Iapetus was seated but in a spot where one could vaguely see his position, a man and a woman were listening quietly to the statements on stage. The taller man occasionally clapped softly, seemingly offering his admiration for the contestants' brilliant performances. It seems that, all these years later, people still remember your story very well, he said. At that moment, the contestant speaking in the center of the venue was the same one who had been in front of Andrea at the opening. He was elaborating on the proofs of the Bronze Age's inferiority, but his words seemed much hollower compared to Odysseus's. However, this wasn't because his ability was truly inferior. In fact, anyone who managed to defeat various opponents to stand on the final stage had a decent level of skill. But in a debate, if you're not only thinking about the topic at hand but also influenced by external pressures, then it's normal for your performance to suffer. Clearly, this contestant had given up on winning. All he wanted now was to demonstrate his own devotion. If he had been in the Bronze Age, he would probably have been one of the first priests to support deceiving the deities and take delight in it. That is, if he really could be chosen. With a faint comment, Epimetheus felt that the likelihood of the other being selected wasn't small. He knew Prometheus, even often better than he knew himself. As the god of afterthought, having followed his older brother for so many years, Epimetheus had long understood what kind of person the other was. If it had been the Prometheus of the past, he would definitely have favored the other's intelligence above others and might even have taken him as a student. Yet the most ridiculous part was that his most valued student had neither been grateful for his grace nor remained loyal to him, not to mention that the wisdom had not been displayed at all. If that human had truly achieved immortality through betrayal, Epimetheus might have regarded him highly. But from start to finish, that human was like a joke. Just tell me, what are you planning to do now? With a languid expression and hair scattered over her shoulders and neck, Pandora leaned back in her seat like a mortal worn out from staying up all night. Her voice was lifeless, as if disinterested in everything. Compared to before, her body hadn't changed much, but her spirit seemed to have altered a great deal. The widespread tales of my ordeal are, in part, thanks to your efforts, aren't they? The absurd sect, the bewildering sacrifices, after so many attempts, you should give up. Whether it's the methods of true gods, evil gods, or those belonging to outer gods, baptism, Holocaust, or the cruel torment of human sacrifice, they are all useless to me. I am not one of you, I cannot draw strength from them, nor can I become a deity. Perhaps this magic jar is just a joke, a casual prank by the Lord of the Spirit Realm, holding no power to change fate or produce miracles. Despite my wishes to it for so long, what has been the result? Biting her lip slightly, it was unclear whether she harbored resentment towards the goddess of the nether moon, who had given her this gift, the all-gods who had tempted her to open the magic jar, or was simply venting her frustration on her husband in name only. In Pandora's perception, compared to the jar, she might be the actual experiment of Epimetheus. More than once she had wanted to give up, suggesting that he should experiment with someone else, another human, but each time he categorically refused. I don't know if your initiative in handing over the magic jar to others would affect fate and thus make the jar no longer belong to you, or to me. We are both eternal. There's no need to lose faith in it so soon. That's what he had said, and that's what he had done. Yet besides more futile efforts, Pandora felt she had gained nothing. Don't rush. I feel there's still a chance this time. Speaking with a smile, Epimetheus still enjoyed watching the debate. This time, we've been deciding our direction and distance by flipping a coin and tossing branches, and we just happened to arrive at the Acropolis of Athens, and just happened to come across this somewhat abnormal debate. Tell me, could this be guidance from fate? Maybe before, I was just interfering too much, too randomly, so this time, I'll do nothing. Everything follows your footsteps. Let's see who you'll meet and what happens along the way. C 624 to 204 The Second Breaker. Backquote, backquote, backquote. If that's what you think it is, the guidance of fate, after all, I can't defy you, can I? She spoke indifferently, without any further reaction, and Pandora gently closed her eyes. Unlike Epimetheus, she had no interest in watching this so-called debate, for with the passing years, the faith that lingered around her yet remained unabsorbed had only increased. Even without direct contact, but with the accumulation of numbers, the countless pleas, curses, hatred, and fear continually tormented her. Whenever a calamity or disease struck the mortal realm, she was invoked by humans as the embodiment of disaster. Even if her received faith for an individual catastrophe didn't match that dedicated to the governing deity, the total was overwhelming. In such circumstances, even though the blessings of all gods had never been withdrawn, Pandora still felt pain and weariness from the depths of her spirit. For a moment, she felt a pang of regret. Not for opening the magic jar, because she had realized that perhaps her very purpose was to open it. Her regret was that, 1,000 years prior, during the first great snow that blanketed the world, she had let her name slip unintentionally on her journey. The woman who had brought calamity had thought that the name, Pandora, would attract the attention of the gods and they would find her an Epimetheus. She wanted to plead for the gods' mercy for her sin, to end her aimless wandering on the earth, but the outcome had sorely disappointed her. No god paid her any heed, as if she had really done nothing at all. On the contrary, the god of hindsight seemed to take inspiration and established a so-called church in her name. Of course, this church, labeled a cult, was equally useless. Once a tool has served its purpose, it can be destroyed. If its whereabouts are unknown, then it might as well be considered lost. Perhaps the gods have not withdrawn their blessings from me, not only because it would be troublesome but more so because they have forgotten me. In Olympus, there is scarcely anyone who remembers the existence of Pandora. Whether in a dream or in reality, Pandora couldn't remember the last time she had slept. With her eyes closed, the sounds of the ongoing debate and the occasional applause seemed increasingly distant. She didn't know how much time had passed. It could have been a very long while or just a brief moment. At some point, Pandora, mired in a daze, seemed to hear a low call from Epimetheus, after which silence suddenly fell around her. Even the disturbance brought by the clamor of faith seemed to be cut off, and she hadn't felt such peace in a long time. Are you Pandora? A woman's voice sounded in front of her, and Pandora opened her eyes. There stood a woman who appeared to be in her 40s, with various patterns embroidered on her brown robe. Her long hair was gathered on top of her head, with a clear and sparkling wooden hairpin passing through the middle. Pandora did not recognize this woman, but she knew that the other party was no ordinary person. Because Epimetheus was silently standing aside, just as the first time they had met. I am. Nodding, Pandora acknowledged her identity, for she bore the unmistakable mark of the gods, blessings on her. Good, I have been searching for you for a long time. It was neither illusion nor accident. Just as Iapetus had seen, Gaia had indeed come to Athens, not for this assembly, and not for the god of speech. After another up and down glance at Pandora, Gaia smiled satisfactorily. Indeed, once a tool has been used, it is often destroyed, but even as a tool, I suppose no one wishes to vanish without a trace. Quote. What do you want me to do? After a moment of silence, Pandora seemed resigned as she spoke. I don't know. Shaking her head slightly, Gaia motioned with her hand, and a sphere flickering with specks of starlight, each internal point of differing sizes, appeared in her hand. At a glance, Pandora seemed to witness the collapse of all things, the end of materiality, and some form of a twisted, despairing cry. It felt familiar. This unique state. Was it somewhat like what Epimetheus had described, those divine fragments of the ancient sun god scattered across the earth? In that moment, numerous speculations flashed through Pandora's mind. Could this be the delayed fate of the magic jar? But this did not align with her own prayers. She had seen many beasts that had merged with divine fragments, but not only did they have to constantly endure the mental pollution from within the fragments, they also hadn't become deities as a result. Even after the disaster of Typhon had ended, when the 3 rounds of man-made suns, each embodying authority, took turns rising into the sky, Pandora had discussed this matter with Epimetheus. He had assured her that even if someone could withstand the mental shock of those 3 suns and took hold of their respective authorities, they still wouldn't be considered true gods. Backquote, backquote, backquote. After all, the authority of a true god cannot be stripped away by beings outside of the world, but if those divine fragments were to be taken by others, the power that originally belonged to you would also be lost. All the while, Pandora was certain that what she had once prayed to become was indeed a true god, one with unstrippable authority, eternally undying within this world. Could it be that this was a destiny the magic jar could not manifest, leading her to settle for less? Or perhaps, this actually suggested something, such as the key role these divine fragments might play in becoming a true deity. For a moment, 1,000 thoughts whirled in Pandora's heart, yet Gaia clearly perceived none of them. It was entirely normal for mortals to be shocked and dumbfounded by such a sight. After all, they were not very knowledgeable to begin with. I do not know if you understand what this thing is, nor if you are aware of the kind of power required to create such a result, but it does not matter, I can tell you. It is Perseus, the god of material destruction, a true god who is arrogantly disrespectful towards his own parents and elders, and shows no mercy to his own children. But all that is in the past, now he is what you see before you. Gaia's narration was impassive, and Pandora listened quietly, while at that moment, Epimetheus didn't even know what to say. It was the first time he had let Pandora follow destiny, and then she had immediately run into the long-lost Mother Earth. Whatever Pandora could think of, he naturally could too, and it seemed that this meeting did indeed play a role in fulfilling a wish, but it was definitely not the kind of effect he desired. Huff. At least I've drawn 2 lessons. Making a wish to the magic jar is indeed effective, it's just that it probably only works for the wish itself. For the people around, such as me, it probably does not take into account at all. Furthermore, water always flows where the resistance is least, and perhaps destiny, after confirming its destination, will also only flow along the most direct trajectory. As for whether this aligns with the initial intention of the wisher, that remains unknown. The name of Perseus, the god of material destruction, was known to Epimetheus, but how Pandora's wish was to be realized through him, the god of hindsight could not determine. He too had once fantasized about the power of a shattered sun, and thus had researched those divine fragments. He was roughly aware of their pros and cons. Intuition told Epimetheus that whether Pandora could become a true god or not, he was unsure, but even if she did, it would likely not be what she anticipated. In the palace of the primordial sea god within the Pontus Euxinus. The arrival of Gaia or the presence of Iapetus, these unexpected participants in the convention had not drawn the attention of the gods observing the phantom. Only Zeus, acting as the caster, seemed to sense some slight traces of the god of speech, but he said nothing, acting as if he did not exist. However, the lack of reaction from Zeus didn't mean the other gods watching the event felt the same. As Andreas' increasingly sharp speeches were conveyed through the phantom in front of all gods, some deities were growing impatient. Your Majesty, I was unaware until now that such blasphemous beings existed among the mortals, and she is capable of standing at a grand event in Athens, spreading her ideology to even more mortals. With a somewhat excited expression, Ares stepped forward, looking towards Zeus who sat upon the golden throne. I think such a person has no right to keep living on earth, she should receive eternal punishment like Tantalus. Please permit me to go to the mortal realm myself and bestow upon her the fate she deserves. Even without explicit words, the gods could tell that Ares was so eager to try, simply because it was Athens. As he spoke, he even glances towards where Athena was, yet regrettably, she did not even spare him a glance. Ares, this is merely a debate, and the positions held in a debate do not represent the speaker's own views. If you were to act on it, it would only tarnish the reputation of the gods. Speaking softly, it was Hestia who addressed Zeus. The opinion of Ares was not important. What mattered was what the divine king thought. And based on past experience, Zeus, while not likely to directly express his view, would certainly hint at something. The goddess of Hearthfire did not know if her plea would make a difference, but she spoke up nonetheless. To her surprise, this time, Zeus did not seem angry at all. Stay updated via FreeWebNovel. That's right, Ares, it's only a human debate. Since I have already promised not to punish them for their speeches, I will certainly keep my word. Zeus spoke calmly, his mood seemingly oddly positive. Moreover, if she wins the final victory, she will come here to become the judge who decides the fate of the golden apple. Zephyrus, it's getting late, why don't you set off in advance? As you wish, your majesty. Zephyrus too was unclear about what Zeus was planning, but the god of the west wind never pondered over things he couldn't understand. He simply stood up, bowed, and then transformed into a gust of wind, disappearing from sight. Single quote. C 625 to 205 The path. The wind god left the temple, and far away in Acropolis, Gaia's conversation with Pandora continued. Perseus, the god of material destruction, son of Creus and Eurybia, was also the father of Hecate. Strictly speaking, the godhood of material destruction in other worlds should be subordinate to death, but as in the original myths where Thanatos, the god simply of harvesting souls, was directly strangled at birth, due to chaos's imbalance of life and death, the actual godhood of Perseus leaned more towards destruction and dissolution, rather than death and the end. However, this also perfectly suited his identity as the former god of meteorology and son of Creus. The essence of Perseus's authority lay in the part of meteorology that tended towards catastrophes and destruction, the collapse of natural material structures, and he shared the domain related to natural disasters with later-born earth-shaker god and lord of the storm, Poseidon. In terms of lineage, he was one of the 12 principal gods of Olympus today, the uncle of Zeus's most trusted wind god, Zephyrus, the son-in-law of the lightless celestial body god, Koios, and the grandson of the ancient sea god, Pontus. In terms of power, he himself was a being who touched upon great divine strength solely by virtue of his innate divine position, even stronger than the former ancient sun god Helios who only presided over the motion of the sun. In terms of starting conditions, Perseus seemingly had everything. Among the Titans' deities, he was one of the few second-generation Titans with the best innate conditions, until the day Hecate was born. On that day, like Poseidon, the godhood of Perseus, which also tended towards natural disasters and destruction, made big speeches at the banquet of the second-generation divine king, expressing his dissatisfaction with his wife, the goddess of meteor, Asteria, while mocking Cronus for committing crimes against the heavens, resulting in the birth of a deity without godhood. His anger was not unfounded. After all, his marriage to Asteria was essentially a trade, a medium for the former divine king to win over the lightless celestial body god to oppose the ancient sun god. But regardless of the reasons, Perseus still paid the price for such brazen speech. The lightless celestial body god Koios immediately gave up on this son-in-law he already disliked. Creus also began to loathe this son, and Cronus, who was already feeling guilty, did not need to say anything, as he was very restrained for not turning hostile on the spot. After sabotaging his own starting connections, Perseus, realizing this, did not care much, because although his power had not reached its peak at the time, he was already a true god with intermediate divine power. Like Poseidon, unwilling to be inferior to others, and with strength, where in the world could he not go? Thus, Perseus immediately went down to the desolate and lonely land beneath the earth, into the underworld lit by the nether moon. The laws there were also in line with his godhood, and if he could subdue the gods of the underworld, then when he ascended to great divine strength, according to the situation of the early middle period of the Second Era, he would also be considered a ruler in his own right. But ideals are always beautiful, and reality is cruel. Despite not being a deity known for staying out of trouble, he had remained inconspicuous since the Second Era. Not only did Hecate never hear any news about him, even when asking Leto, she only got a vague answer, which of course was not without reason. C3 to 88. Because not long after coming to the underworld, Perseus encountered Gaia. Or rather, the underworld originally belonged to part of Gaia's power before Hades was born. So, he has been imprisoned by you for an era. Backquote, backquote, backquote. Pandora softly inquired, looking at the orb in front of her, shimmering with starlight. Read exclusive content at FreeWebNovel. She had never imagined that such a powerful deity would end up in such a state. That's not quite it. At first, I just wanted him to help me search for the whereabouts of those children in the abyss. Unfortunately, in the end, he proved with facts that an existence imprisoned by the Divine King could only be released by the Divine King. At least that was the case for the abyss in the previous two epics. After that, he seemed quite resentful of me for sending him into Tartarus, so I kept him there a little longer, planning to let him reflect on his mistakes before letting him go. By the time Zeus was born and Cronus's strength grew day by day, I shifted my attention to the surface, and I forgot all about him. Speaking lightly, Gaia showed no embarrassment when mentioning forgetting. She really hadn't done so on purpose. In dealings with her own offspring, Gaia had always been quite fair, so it wasn't until Perseus had a fallout with his father that Mother Earth employed him as forced labor to explore the abyss. When Zeus, a replacement, came along, she put Perseus aside even more. According to the original plan, Gaia was prepared to let Perseus go after Zeus rescued the Titans. However, plans couldn't keep up with changes. From the day Zeus freed the Titans, a decade of the Titan War, the cataclysm of the changing epic, Gaia's centuries of slumber, waking up to fight Olympus, and then being defeated in plain view before giving birth to Typhon. For Gaia, she hardly had a moment to spare. Once Typhon was defeated, she finally realized that the current Zeus was no longer someone who could be overthrown with mere brute force. Looking back, remembering Perseus who had been forgotten for so long. Listening to his curses and hatred from within his imprisonment, Gaia, somewhat tainted by darkness, decided not to do things by halves. The moment Typhon fell completely, Mother Earth didn't appear because she was busy with this matter. She utilized the power lingering on the outer god from the destruction of the 9 realms, shattered Perseus's existence, and created a situation similar to the ancient sun god. Quote. So I. Should she merge with this authority? She was well aware of how difficult merging with such things could be. Although she didn't know that facing source power was something only a truly complete great divine power consciousness could do, Pandora still understood it wasn't something she could safely attempt. She unconsciously took half a step back, but the cold touch behind her reminded her that this was the hall of the council debate. There was nowhere for her to retreat behind her, and she couldn't possibly run away from Gaia. Pandora turned her gaze towards Epimetheus, and then, as expected, received no response. She then looked at the clay jar she was holding, and just as every time before, it was just an ordinary jar, eliciting no reaction. Yes, just as you thought, take it one step at a time, you'll succeed. Nodding in acknowledgement of Pandora's guess, Gaia ignored her plea for help. Back when she created the Silver Generation, she had seen this offspring of Iapetus. He didn't have the guts to do anything, just as he didn't have the courage to save his 2 brothers who were imprisoned. As for that magic jar. Relax, it's said to be a gift from fate, isn't it? It was because of it that I chose you. If anything in this world can make the primordial gods feel awe, true fate is one of them. I don't know if it's truly useful, but such a task that would normally be impossible, we can only hope in fate. But this is a gift to humans. Clutching the earthen jar that had brought her a brief glory but mostly pain, Pandora tried to convince Gaia, it won't work for your request. No, it will, this is what Laine owes me. Her voice suddenly became shrill, and her face contorted for a moment, but in the next instant, as if changing a mask, Gaia returned to normal. It will. Her voice was gentle as the woman in her 40s spoke with a smile. People say it's hope, don't they? Perhaps it will only come into effect when its master faces a disaster, pulling you out of the abyss of despair. Feeling utterly cold, Pandora knew she couldn't refuse. She didn't know what exactly she had done wrong, why everyone in the world was deceiving her, using her. The gods created her, and she woke up on Mount Olympus, in the palace of the gods, thinking she was the darling of the deities, but later, she learned that she was born as a tool, to be one of the excuses for the destruction of the Bronze Age. Epimetheus married her, the Graces came to flatter her, and she lived happily in the mortal realm for a while, but later she learned that the Afterthinker had never loved her, he had merely used this god-made woman as a pawn to achieve his own goals. Latterly, the 4th generation of humans, born from her children, scorned her, cursed her, and she had no choice but to place all her hopes in the jar in her hand. However, hope is like a light in the darkness, you can only see it but never touch it. Until today, hope has not only failed to help her but has also led her into another abyss. Looking back on her life, Pandora suddenly realized that she seemed to have never been loved. Perhaps there was love from Hestia at the moment of her birth. After all, she alone had bestowed upon Pandora a guardian role, rather than those seemingly useful but actually calamitous innate talents. No, perhaps that was pity as well. You say this is hope. Holding up the earthen jar, Pandora's smile was radiant. I think it's a curse. No one will curse you, and you aren't worthy of the curse from the Lord of the Spirit Realm. Speaking indifferently, Gaia didn't care what Pandora was thinking. Now, take your first step. It might be a coincidence, but it seems there's a strict limitation on the size of the shattered divine fragments. Besides the most core authority, their sizes are divided into 9 ranks. 5, 3, 1, an odd number leads to a qualitative change. Since you are a deep-seated original human, skip the first 5 ranks and directly make contact with the 6th. With me here, nobody will interfere with you. Quote. Then, let's begin. Nodding her head, knowing there were no second options, Pandora reached out her hand and directly touched that crystal clear sphere. She was no longer afraid. If this is a curse, then I am the disaster. What kind of disaster would be afraid of destruction? As her palm touched the authority from Perseus, an intuition rose within Pandora. Her wish might not have been twisted. She indeed would become a true god who truly held authority, with power that couldn't be snatched away, and her strength wouldn't really come from the legacy of Perseus. She caught a glimpse of another path, the one destined for her. C 626-206, the end of the debate. Indeed, this debate was never going to be simple. His expression clear, Iapetus was surprised for just a moment before he found the situation unsurprising. Zeus altering the debate topic before didn't seem to be his main goal, that was at best a side objective. He certainly had other ideas, and the arrival of Zephyrus confirmed this. But all these were internal affairs of Olympus. Dividing his attention in 3, Iapetus couldn't help but counter. I see, someone is waiting up there above the assembly, but what does that have to do with me? Indeed, both on the surface and in essence, the arrival of the god of West Wind had nothing to do with him. Even though through Andreas' mouth, Iapetus had made many a statement that clashed with the divine court's harmony and values, for a primordial titan, he shouldn't be so troubled over a debate in the mortal realm as to provoke the divine king's censure. After all, he was merely sticking up for his son. No matter how you looked at it, Zephyrus wasn't there for him. It seems unrelated if we speak in conventional terms. However, the revelation of fate tells me that what's about to happen here is closely related to you, so I suggest you at least watch the whole process of this assembly. What do you think? Single quote. Then I'll wait a bit longer. Although the god of speech was unaware of the existence of the golden apple and was also ignorant of the fact that the skill most masterly wielded by many a goddess was displaced anger, he thought it over and nodded in agreement. Enjoy exclusive adventures from Freeweb Novel. Iapetus felt as if he had fallen into a trap. He had only come to watch a debate. How had he ended up encountering Gaia? Encountering Gaia wasn't a problem. He just wanted to dodge some cravings and hassle, so how did he end up participating in the debate personally? A mere mortal debate had never been of concern to him, but why did the divine king intervene? And clearly, something else was bound to happen afterward. Regardless, the debate wasn't over yet, so the god of speech, adhering to the principle of seeing things through, refocused his energy on this pastime of his. It must be said, this human prince named Odysseus had some skill. If he hadn't been influenced by other factors, he might have performed even better. Outside the battleground of the contestants, whether deep in the sea or among the spectators, the conversations between deities continued. And on the floating platform, the verbal duel over whether the destruction of the Bronze Age was just had been going on for several water clock times. If it hadn't been for Apollo's last-minute neglect of duty, it would already be afternoon in the human world now. But as clouds gathered, the fierce sun was obscured, and the cool winds of autumn took away the sultriness of the venue. During the debate, the focus of the argument shifted several times. When Odysseus countered, the justice of humans with, gods create all spirits, Andrea swiftly pointed out his opponent's flaw. First, do all gods acknowledge, he who creates life owns it? Clearly, they do not. After all, bronze humanity was created by Prometheus. By such logic, they would undoubtedly belong to the forethinking god rather than Olympus. Further, if the gods believe that, issuing the command, counts as partaking in creation, and so the divine king commanding Prometheus to create humans means that bronze humanity also belongs to the divine king, then two problems arise. 1. The catastrophic flood did not just kill humans, other lives created by the ancient gods were also lost. Divine court's slaying of others' creations could hardly be considered just. On another note, if issuing commands is also considered participation in creation, then the current generation of humans are still made by gods. After all, according to legend, Deucalion and Pitha, who survived the Great Flood, created the new humanity under the guidance of the gods. So if the destruction of the Bronze Age by gods can be just, then the gods destroying the current age could also be called just. Andreas' words were sharp, but as her opponent, Odysseus naturally had his rebuttals. A debate is not a discussion of right and wrong, but a verbal war. Thus, he countered each point Andrea had raised. Firstly, the gods annihilated bronze for a reason. Prometheus and the deceit of the Bronze Age sacrificed her precursors. it wasn't without reason or cause, and in current times, no god has committed such a transgression, nor did all kings and aristocrats unite against the deity, so the gods destroying the fourth generation of humans is simply an invalid premise. Moreover, he had heard that the heavens and earth have no will of their own, but they can provide revelations of destiny, guiding gods and humans onto the right path. Nature does not impart knowledge, but by observing changes in everything, the movement of stars, humans can learn principles to push civilization forward. Therefore, revelation may not contain subjective will, and the truths perceived by humans could be the manifestation of rules. So even though Deucalion and Pitha were guided by a deity, the creation of the fourth generation of humans might not be directly related to gods, so Andreas' accusation falls apart. As for the deaths and injuries of other lives during the Bronze Age, humans don't know whether the gods who created those lives agreed to their destruction, nor do we know if they resisted, do we? Besides, it's said that the inhabitants of the distant Silver Moon City claim to be remnants of the Bronze Age. Does this not suggest that the Olympian gods might have considered other deities' opinions, slain those in agreement, and spared those cherished by dissenting creators? C 627-206. The end of the debate _2. Having completed his round of defense, Odysseus naturally could not let the matter rest. Merely unraveling the opponent's line of attack would only put him at a disadvantage, so he decisively turned defense into attack, shifting the topic from the justice of the divine court to why question the justice of the divine court. Stay connected through Freeweb novel. He argued that Andrea believed the actions of the divine court during the Bronze Age were unjust and that the allegations of injustice during the Bronze Age mostly elaborated on the broad extent of divine punishment and the many deaths. Later, Andrea even questioned him. If the gods were to also destroy the fourth generation of humans, would you still think that was just? Odysseus believed that such speech was likely affected by subjective emotions. Did this prove that the reason Andrea wanted to prove the injustice of the divine court was actually due to concern that the deities would continue the destruction of humans, and that the accusation against the divine court was merely out of a sense of hurt to one's kind? There was no need for this because the divine court was just, it had its reasons for destroying the Bronze Age, and during that age, the Church of all gods had deeply intervened in all aspects of human life. Humans could not understand the justice of the gods, so the gods told humans what their justice was through the church. Nowadays, the moral values and culture of humans have not escaped the influence of the gods. Among the rulers of humans, there are few who rebelliously blaspheme against all gods. Thus, the catastrophe of the Bronze Age was destined not to recur in this era. This statement undoubtedly resonated enormously among the audience because, as the debate progressed, indeed some were starting to fear. Odysseus's words not only dispelled their doubts but also gave them a psychological suggestion. You have to believe the divine court is just. After all, a just divine court naturally would not bring down disaster indiscriminately, and what I'm saying is right, the fourth generation of humans will not be destroyed. Conversely, if the divine court is not just, everything I say is wrong, and wouldn't that mean the fourth generation of humans is always in danger, potentially facing destruction at any moment? Under such psychological influence, even if it is out of avoidance, many people would subconsciously believe in the justice of the gods. It must be said, in this classical age, it is rare to find someone who can create such psychological traps. This alone is enough to show Odysseus's ability to lead ordinary people. Andrea also noticed this, but she was not the least bit flustered. If the opponent questioned whether she, as a debater, was objective or was influenced by emotions, she naturally could not admit it, but she would not get entangled with him over this. After all, the influence of emotions is too subjective, hard to find solid evidence to prove either way. If she really engaged in debate with him on this, that would indeed be stepping into a trap. Therefore, the tone of the debate on the field shifted, as Andrea no longer eagerly discussed the justice of the Bronze Age's destruction, but began to break through Odysseus's psychological suggestion. The opponent equated the justice of the divine court with the safety of the fourth generation of humans, trying to guide the audience to believe. If the divine court is just, we are safe. If the divine court is unjust, we are in danger, thereby under the influence of avoidance psychology convincing them to believe the divine court has always been just. There are, however, many ways to respond to this. For example, the simplest one is that the fourth generation of humans is inherently different from those of the Bronze Age, and in the current world, if deities really wanted to destroy the world, it would be difficult to say whether they could succeed. However, such statements clash not only with most people's impression of the mighty deities, but also tend towards unraveling the Opponents attack rather than establishing one's own advantage while doing so. So, since Odysseus had used a psychological strategy, Andrea followed suit. She suggested that Odysseus believed the deities told humans the justice of the gods through the means of the church, thereby influencing human thought and culture, which indeed exists. However, this not only failed to prove the consistent justice of the deities but on the contrary, it's a good counterexample. The divine king and the queen of gods preached human marriage, revealing what fair marriage looks like in the eyes of the deities. Yet the divine king and the heavenly empress, who established this standard, did not adhere to the standards they themselves set. On stage, Andrea listed the divine king's betrayal of marriage and mentioned Hera as the guardian of marriage, who, instead of turning the sword against the divine king, perpetrated extensive harm on the women violated by Zeus. The deities themselves invented the institution of marriage, yet while teaching humans to adhere to it, they themselves did as they pleased. Doesn't this precisely demonstrate the difference between gods and humans? If harmonious marriage is indeed recognized as justice by the deities, then reality has proven that the gods themselves can violate it. Therefore, no matter why the Bronze Age perished, it cannot guarantee that the deities won't destroy the fourth generation of humans. If the justice of the gods is indeed incomprehensible to mortals, encompassing both adherence to marriage and destruction of marriage, then Odysseus's argument is also debunked, because humans learn the justice from the gods that are wrong. Humans learning the wrong thing is just like what Prometheus taught about deceit, becoming the basis for the deities to mete out punishment, right? In the course of the conversation, the psychological suggestion established by Odysseus was easily broken, even raising doubts about the justice of the deities among the audience. Although injustice in marriage does not mean injustice in other matters, people are always willing to believe that a criminal has committed more than one crime. Thus, standing on different perspectives, the debate between the two parties continued for several water clock times, and in this clash of thoughts and words, the audience present also felt the appeal of language. A debate does not really need to result in a victory or defeat, unless there is a large gap in the level of the debaters, otherwise it is rare to see one party rendered speechless, and it is more about one side being forced to defend passively, being at a disadvantage during the exchange. So ultimately, as time passed, this debate gradually moved towards its conclusion. Now, please give your final statements, and after this, the 183,000-strong audience present will make their choice. Serving as judges, they will decide the champion of this debate. The long-absent elder returned to the stage, and looking at his face, it was hard to hide his fatigue. He probably never did understand how the topic was changed. But the matter being as it is, facing the audience and the debaters, he still showed a smile. Your splendid debates will surely be recorded in history, and this clash of wisdom will become one of the most brilliant pearls we offer to the goddess. C 628-207, Setting Out. Just as with speeches, debates are endeavors that test both the mind and body. The brain's reasoning, the agile responses, the expression of emotions through body language. This was not the so-called debate competition of later generations where one person only had a few minutes to speak. Rather than speaking rapidly, participants placed more importance on the impression they made on the judges. After all, the true objective of convincing in a debate seems to be the opponent, but in reality, it is the audience watching. As long as they acknowledge the logic of your argument, then your debate is successful. Ladies and gentlemen present here, my friends sharing this stage with me, and deities above and below us. The order of the concluding remarks was the opposite of the opening speeches, so at the end, when it was Odysseus's turn to make his final address, he stood at the center of the venue, arms outstretched, as if embracing the entire world. Previously, we thoroughly examined the circumstances of the Bronze Age's destruction. And Miss Leah's critical view of the gods, deeds and misdeeds, the right and wrong in their actions, centered around human justice, is a thought-provoking perspective. But as I said, gods are born innately, they are the creators of the world. All spirits are made by the gods, and every being is the creation of the gods. As mortals who are not born with innate knowledge, from the distant golden age to the present, whether it be human, good, or evil, which aspect exists independently, born without the influence of the gods. Believing in human justice does not conflict with understanding the gods, because the relationship between humans and gods is close, with an inseparable connection between the two. In the distant golden age, the gods fashioned humans in their own image and endowed them with all that is positive and good, establishing the bonds between humans and gods from that moment. And concepts like justice, which are not naturally occurring but are built upon the society of living beings, naturally follow this principle. since the norms of human society originally stem from the gods, then humans should naturally learn it first, rather than question it. I have heard that ancient heroes achieved countless feats in their lifetimes, and in the end, they were raised to the heavens, which is the closest depiction of the relationship between humans and gods. Everything about a human comes from the gods, and all that the gods represent is ultimately the destination of humanity. Lastly, I dedicate this grand debate to the wisdom of Athena, as is fitting etiquette for a foreigner like myself. A hubbub of voices arose among the audience below, and applause for these wise men of the nations rose and fell in waves. The debate had ended, but the ultimate victor had not yet been chosen. Everyone knew that soon, it would be time to select the champion. Almost simultaneously, another box was opened on the audience's seats, a similar arrangement to the one used at the beginning to select the topic appeared before them. All the spectators will once again use flags bearing the names of different contestants to draw a perfect end to this grand event. As the organizer, before the results come out, I will announce the prize for the champion of this competition. The host took the stage once again, facing the audience present. The treasury of Athens will be open to him. The victor will have the right to choose what he desires from it, and the prize from the church will be personally reviewed by the deity. As his words fell, the atmosphere on the scene heated up even more. The noise ebbed and flowed as the host lifted his hand, and the official voting for the final victor began. A few projected numbers floated in midair, updating in real time the changing vote counts for the different contestants. However, it was evident that two numbers were far outpacing the rest, not even in the same league as the others. This is indeed fair, Iapetus nodded as he sat below. But the fairness he referred to was not about the count but about the competition itself. Purely from the standpoint of debate, this young man actually finds himself at a disadvantage. The topic of this competition is to discuss the justice and injustice of the Bronze Age's demise, but due to identity and stance, he could only limit the discussion to the justice of the gods, often leaving him at a disadvantage during the debate. Yet, from the external environment, people ultimately revere the deities, and their voting tendency will naturally be biased. The plus and minus between these create a balance that cancels each other out. As his hobby, Iapetus hoped for a fairly adjudicated outcome for the event. Thus, satisfied with everything, the god of speech quietly awaited the determination of the victor. As time ticked away, the numbers in the sky grew larger. The ethereal hourglass reminded the audience to make their choices quickly, and before the sand ran out, the last spectator finally cast their vote. The results were in, and the crowd should have been cheering the birth of a champion, but an awkward silence had fallen over the contest. Because whether by coincidence or not, the two highest scores turned out to be exactly equal, not a point off. For a moment, Modia, the host, was frozen in place once again. In the past, the judges' bench for a competition would generally have an odd number of votes to prevent a tie. With the voting involving tens of thousands of spectators this time, he had assumed that such a situation would not occur. After all, obtaining equal votes out of tens of thousands would be incredibly difficult, yet there it was, happening right before his eyes. Ahem, Mr. Modia, please announce the final champion, Odysseus coughed lightly, breaking the silence at that moment. He looked at the host and then glanced at Andrea. You have won this competition. Not because of the debate, but because to this day, I have not solved your riddle. This is a contest that tests wisdom and justice, and the debate is only a part of it. I, Odysseus, will not claim honor that doesn't belong to me. The young prince's voice arose within the arena, instantly easing the previously awkward atmosphere, followed by enthusiastic applause. And faced with this sudden turn of events, Andrea was taken aback. She intended to decline because only she knew the truth behind her string of victories. But in the end, she smiled and accepted. It wasn't me who defeated you, Odysseus, I too stood on the shoulders of giants, it was the wisdom of my predecessors that made me. However, since you are so interested in my game, I will tell you its secret. A game in itself does not represent wisdom, but I think its solution could indeed bear more fruitful knowledge for this era. In the midst of speech, the champion of this assembly was thoroughly determined. As the host, Modia too breathed a sigh of relief, waving his hand as gorgeous floral ribbons fluttered out from all directions, starting to dance in the sky. After a series of twists and turns, the debate finally ended, and the floating platform where Andrea stood slowly rose and then moved to the center of the arena. A few transcendent individuals were already sensing a powerful presence rising from the east. The presence was surely that of Theseus, the king of Athens, protector of the fortress city to the east of the Acropolis. He would present the award to the champion personally, a tradition of long standing. The legendary king of Athens, who had elevated it from a mid-level nation to today's regional hegemon. Guests from various nations all wished to see for themselves what this king, who respected the all-gods less than the rumors suggested but was still bold and domineering, looked like. Andrea felt a slight pang of guilt. After all, since escaping the pursuit of the resurrection sect, she should have returned to the royal palace. Although this was because Laine did not allow it, she knew very well that throughout the journey, she had never tried to secretly contact any official personnel in Athens. I wonder how angry father is. Her heart was in turmoil, but she tried her best not to show it. Like all the spectators present, Andrea awaited Theseus's arrival. However, in the next moment, the quietly waiting little princess suddenly looked up, and so did the audience. For the clouds in the sky had suddenly parted to form a hole, and the sun's light previously obscured poured through, shining in midair. A figure dressed in a pale blue chiton and a golden robe appeared within the sunlight. In his hand, he held a scepter, looking down upon the tens of thousands of people in the spacious arena. Invisible currents of air swirled around him, causing his robes to flutter noisily. I am Zephyrus, the principal god of Olympus, the lord of mortal meteorology. His voice was calm but slightly hurried. The god of west wind extended his hand and a golden ladder immediately materialized out of nowhere. I am here by the divine king's command, to invite the most wise and just mortal to the deities' banquet. So mortal, do you accept this honor and agree to partake in the feast of the gods? Normally, Zephyrus wouldn't ask for acceptance, but sensing the approaching king of Athens, he used more gentle words. As a wind god skilled in evasion and roaming, he did not have the same trepidations as the sea god who ruled over fixed maritime domains concerning the thorny powerful mortals. But now he was here by the divine king's command, and it was best not to court trouble if he could avoid it. If you had listened to the debate just now, perhaps you would understand that for such an honor, it might be better to choose Odysseus. After a moment of silence, facing the god of west wind, Andrea spoke up. So you're refusing my invitation? Zephyrus furrowed his brow slightly, actually a bit unsure of what to do. The counts from earlier had been close. Theoretically, he would have chosen Odysseus if possible. But when he departed, the divine king seemed to have no aversion to Andrea. Who knew what Zeus was thinking? But after sizing up Andrea, Zephyrus suddenly had a moment of realization. The gods do not harbor dissatisfaction over mortal debates. Mortal, do you accept my invitation? Then I accept. Taking a deep breath, Andrea nodded in agreement. She called out to Laine in her mind, and then received a corresponding response. Perhaps this was the reason she had come to this great assembly. Realizing this, Andrea relaxed slightly. Thus, amidst the envious, jealous, curious, and mocking gazes of the tens of thousands of spectators, Andrea stepped onto the golden ladder. A banquet of the gods, it was her first time witnessing it. C 629 to 208 choices, jokes, father and son. Pontus Euxinus, inside the palace of the primordial sea god. The debate in the mortal world had ended, and the illusory images shattered accordingly. As Andrea spoke within her mind, the gods within the great hall were similarly awaiting her arrival. At last, the god of west wind had invited the victor of the mortal assembly. The destiny of the golden apple was about to be settled, yet the atmosphere inside the great hall remained heavy. The gazes of the gods intertwined, slightly distorting the air itself. Zeus, it seems the arbiter you found is not too fond of Olympus, said one. Even if it was just a temporary stance for the debate, the words she spoke do not sound like those from someone who holds faith in deities. The eyes subconsciously swept across Phoebe, the goddess of luminous, as Hera clenched the armrest. Why do the old things of yesteryear still covet their affairs? The current chaos belongs to the era of the Olympian pantheon. Never mind, Hera. As the king of all gods, I can always tolerate those dissenters, as long as they aren't as mad as that rebellious child. As my heavenly empress, you should also demonstrate your magnanimity, said Zeus. With a slight wave of his hand, compared to Hera, Zeus seemed completely unconcerned about Andrea's previous speech. Lies do no harm, but the truth is a swift blade, all built on equal status and power. No one gets angry over an ant's provocations, they find it amusing most of the time, unless they are in a foul mood and simply crush the ant on a whim. And Andrea, it was clear she was but an ant in Zeus's eyes, even though he was only observing through the eyes of his followers. As the reigning divine king, he had already discerned certain details about her, such as her probable role as a godhood practitioner, her concealed true appearance, and the iapetus he had noticed earlier. As Laine had previously suggested, using the power of the serpent of the central court for a transformation might indeed possess very potent effects. It could deceive the majority of deities, allowing them to be fooled by a false exterior, but this certainly did not include Zeus, who had already partially completed the sovereign ritual. He was able to see the issues, just as Laine had thought. Although Zeus had realized something, he had no intention of disclosing it. Among many professionals of the mortal world, godhood practitioners are the least regarded by the gods, since they can never pose a threat to deities, and their actions are often directed by divine will. A godhood practitioner criticizing Olympus for the destruction of the Bronze Age clearly doesn't represent her own views. It likely isn't Athena. His dear daughter wouldn't do something so blunt. Quietly, has this deity of the old Titans era aligned herself under my daughter's command? Then there's this disguise. Previously seen through a layer, Zeus couldn't discern it clearly. Now observing in person, he noticed several discrepancies. Athens was suppressed by many kingdoms, yet a single mortal stabilized the situation. When the gaze of all gods turned toward the mortal realm, his own daughter had already acquired such schemes. If it hadn't been for the grand sovereign ritual, Zeus doubted whether even he, the divine king, could see through the deception. Truly a daughter, stronger than her mother, and fortunate that the son stronger than his father hadn't come to be. Such methods of forming alliances and increasing power right under his own eyes indeed were startling. He secretly celebrated his past decisiveness. After so many years, the image of Métis had seemingly blurred in Zeus's memory. That was the right choice, and now, he was about to make another correct decision. She has arrived. Suddenly, a deity spoke softly inside the great hall. Laine, slightly lifting his head as the portal opened, soon sensed the presence of the newcomer. Under the gaze of all gods, the god of West Wind entered the hall first, followed closely by a tall, blonde girl. At this moment, her appearance was not inferior to the deities in the temple, but in Zeus's eyes, once the covering dissipated, she was just an underage mortal. Letting a woman choose the most beautiful goddess, but this too can be considered fair. On one seat, the god of heavenly light, Ether, nodded slightly. Beside him, his sister and wife, Hemera, the goddess of daylight, seemed eager to try. She had not participated in the scuffle for the golden apple, but that was simply because reason had prevailed over desire. No, goddess did not wish to receive this honor, and she was no exception. And if she were chosen by this mortal without a struggle, probably no one else could say anything. Zephyrus, my friend, thank you for bringing back this wise mortal. You never disappoint me. Laughing, Zeus could clearly see that now in the hall, regardless of whether they had tried to snatch the golden apple before, the goddesses had all perked up. The ownership of the most beautiful goddess could bring strength to those who crave it and honor to those who seek it. No one could resist it, and even he who had caused all this could not stop it now. But Zeus did not want to stop it. Sitting on the golden throne, the divine king took back the scepter from Zephyrus. You've worked hard, my most loyal friend, and the victor of the mortal assembly. Rising from the golden throne, Zeus behaved especially courteously. I listened to your earlier debates, the splendid exchange of arguments. A pity the goddess of justice isn't here, she would definitely delight in this debate about justice. Well, I won't say more. Victor from the mortal world, I think on the way here, Zephyrus must have already told you what to do. Because of Erissa's gift, conflict has spread among the gods. But as the king of all gods, I will not allow this to happen. As I cannot invite the most just goddess among the gods to make the initial judgment, it shall be you, the most just and wise mortal, to make the decision. I promise you, whatever choice you make, the gods will not trouble you, and your name will live forever in the mortal world. Mortal realm, the assembly place where the crowd had not yet dispersed. At the end of the grand assembly, a deity descended, took away the champion, and invited her to attend the banquet of the gods. Regardless of which side they had supported in the debates or whether they believed in the gods, people were extremely curious about the outcome. Unlike the shepherd in the original myth who was chosen to determine the ownership of the golden apple, although that most handsome mortal was also a prince, he was not well known at the time. However, Andreas' departure this time had caused a tremendous impact, and people stayed at the venue, wanting to know the final outcome of the event. A beauty that captivates all beings, does it stir your heart? No. That figures, you're still a child, unable to comprehend the adult pursuit of appearance, probably mistoon to play for the likes of Aphrodite. The scepter of ruling a kingdom, do you desire it or not? You don't. Huh, that makes sense. After all, you've always had everything, what use is there in power? And Amphitrite, she promised you control over ocean currents, to raise tsunamis to destroy your enemies. If she knew you were just plundered at sea not long ago, she probably wouldn't have made that offer. Sitting in the stands, Laine silently reflected on the various temptations Andrea was facing. It was rather ironic. The idea was to allow a mortal to make a choice for fairness' sake, yet the gods were still allowed to tempt the very person making the ultimate decision. This was all part of the routine for the chaotic gods. They were always crafty in both creating rules and breaking them. So what am I supposed to do after all? You brought me here to choose beauty. If so, maybe I should choose Princess Athena. The goddess is the most beautiful, no objections accepted. The voice carried surely. Andrea was undoubtedly undergoing the gods' temptations. After Zeus finished speaking, Andrea hesitated slightly but eventually agreed. After all, having come all this way, she had to make a choice to leave. And if she was to choose, it would undoubtedly be Athena, even though Athena had not yet offered her conditions. Don't rush. Athena is the last goddess you should choose. Athens has enough internal and external troubles. You wouldn't want to add more issues to your nation. This time, stirring up another conflict seems to be the best solution. Though it's also an idea I had only after hearing about the debate in Athens, not sure if it will really work. While speaking, Laine recalled a joke from the future regarding the dispute over the golden apple. If you were to replace Shepherd Paris and decide to whom the golden apple belongs, who would you give it to? Obviously, divide the golden apple into 3, give the skin to Aphrodite, for the joke goes that she's only worth her looks. Hand the flesh to Hera, indicating that the cuckold king gets nothing but the middle part. And finally, offer the core to Athena, since the god king's brother died in the womb, this seed can be a small compensation. By doing so, the 3 goddesses would unite against a common cause, and wouldn't that solve the dilemma of the golden apple? It's unknown where this joke originally came from, but it indeed spread widely later, even inspiring some to write an alternative ancient mythological novel. However, Laine certainly couldn't proceed with such a plan. His mission was to quell fires. Shouldn't be a problem, right? Laine pondered. His arrangement was rather impromptu. He didn't know if it would work out. But there was no helping it. Who could expect to sleep through millennia? Come, have you seen the deity I transferred to you? As a unique message was passed, a seductive and enchanting image appeared in Andrea's mind. She had never seen this deity, nor was there any statue of her in the mortal realm, but with such a distinctive appearance, she recognized it instantly. Let's choose her. She'll take all the blame, remember. Okay then. After hesitating for a moment, Andrea agreed. I just need to make a choice. While you handle complicated strategies behind the scenes, it's quite a trouble, isn't it? Why don't you come and make the choice? Thus, in the temple of the ancient sea god, Andrea suddenly stepped forward, picking up the golden apple placed in front of her. At the same time, the gods who had promised her fell silent. It seems the gods' speeches ultimately couldn't sway your mind. Arbiter from the mortal realm, have you made your decision? Atop the golden throne, Zeus asked with a smile. Yes, regardless of external influences, the truth remains unchanged. And among the gods present, I had already made my choice long ago. With a slight bow, under the nervous and expectant gaze of the gods, under Zeus's confident watch, Andrea turned slightly. Then at that moment, those millions of gazes seemed to turn sharp as spikes. You are the most beautiful goddess in my heart, your highness. Whispers rose. Who is she? Who is she? The atmosphere among the gods was tumultuous, and although Zeus's expression remained unchanged, he was taken by surprise. He looked at the goddess who had taken the golden apple, undoubtedly also a beautiful deity, but why did she seem unfamiliar? Their eyes met. The divine king gazed into her eyes, hoping to discern something, yet for some reason, he seemed to see a pair of eyes both familiar and strange. You, who are you? At the same time, in Tartarus, the 9th layer of hell, on the 9th layer. Asmodeus stood alone in the vast sky, a slight smile on his face. It's a good strategy. Indeed, just a pity, it seems you have forgotten. While we are indeed allies against the abyss, that doesn't mean I'm your puppet. And she is a deity under my command. C 630-209. Draw the sword. Hell and the outside world are different. Women are a rare existence within the 9 hells, for the silver generation had no women. The women that exist today are mostly demons born later, and although some are powerful, most do not have the ability to be active in the mortal realm. In this case, a female from hell who could also partake in feasts of gods, while satisfying these 3 conditions, simply could not be anyone else. Keto, A sea monster who had once drank the blood of Heavenly Father, was deceived by the great devil Mephisto into becoming his accomplice and later became the true god of false beauty. Only she met these conditions, and the golden apple was significant only for her. To the most beautiful goddess, which restricted the competition for it to those recognized by all gods. And now, the golden apple that attracted the gods' attention was before Keto, within reach should she extend her hand. What is this situation? When did she arrive, and why wasn't I notified? In a low exclamation, seated conspicuously near the divine king, Pontus's eldest son, the gentle god of the sea, Nerus, was momentarily at a loss. His remark didn't really make sense, especially since Keto was among the few who could come and go from the palace of the primordial sea god without notifying anyone beforehand or facing any obstruction. Moreover, unlike other deities, Nerus was aware of Keto's existence. Or rather, in the mortal realm, Keto had been actively and openly present for thousands of years, and if her name wasn't more prominent, it was only because she chose to keep a low profile. As a true god who had sided with the nine hells, Keto's situation was different from that of Mephisto and Creus. The former was a black sheep, always had been. A quasi-god appearing suddenly attracted considerable attention and could easily draw the divine court's scrutiny. Thus, though he often traveled to the mortal realm, the great devil was always cautious. As for the latter, the original Creus was indeed a recognized god, but having been reborn, he faced a situation similar to Mephisto's. He was a black sheep now, especially after being reborn with a body that bore regional characteristics following the First War of the Abyss. Moreover, even disregarding his rebirth, he was a prisoner exiled by the divine court. If possible, Zephyrus and Poseidon, who took over his meteorological authority, would likely seize any opportunity to attack him. But Keto was different. She had left Olympus's divine feast voluntarily earlier when she first met Mephisto. Her departure from Mount of the Gods was solely because of Aphrodite. She was not wanted by the divine court, nor had she offended any contemporary gods or committed any crimes, so she didn't need to conceal her existence. The greatest fear Keto had previously, the real goddess of beauty exposing the authority she held under her facade of false beauty, no longer existed. As Mephisto had once promised, although it was difficult to change a deity's true form, being the inherent appearance they were born with, exceptions did occur. Thus now, even through the veil of authority Keto wielded, what was displayed before all gods was no longer her twisted half-snake, half-fish form, but a physique robust and full of allure. Her slender tail swayed behind her, and a pair of delicate sharp horns grew on her head, with the darkness and fire of purgatory swirling and burning within them. Though this still differed from most deities, just like some gods had wings, Keto's new form wasn't repelled by the gods like the Titans were. Instead, it was seen as a distinguishing feature. Even in the eyes of some deities, this was regarded as a special bonus. With a snap, it seemed like a long time had passed, but it was only a moment. Following a sharp snap, in the deathly silent Great Hall, Aphrodite's armrest broke in response. However, at this moment, the goddess of beauty seemed unaware of what she had done, merely glaring at Keto as if looking at an enemy. For a moment, the gods, initially startled by Andrea, regained their composure. Regardless, the golden apple seemed to have found its owner, but who was this unfamiliar deity, and why didn't they remember her? However, while the others might be puzzled, Aphrodite was not. Although she did not recognize Keto, this did not stop her from acting hostile. With a tear, "What are you, and from where do you, a wild god, dare to come here to partake in the divine king's feast, contesting the ownership of the golden apple?" Her swift movement tore her garment, and Aphrodite's voice was even somewhat shrill, unsure why she felt so furious, but she was indeed angry. Reborn once, Keto's appearance had already changed, and thus the false image she crafted with her authority had altered too. Save for the gods with the same lineage from the primordial sea god, hardly any deity would equate her with the original goddess. But while her body could change, her authority would not be replaced. Almost immediately upon seeing this goddess she had never met before, a vast void and malice rose from within Aphrodite. She wanted to kill her. Although gods are undying, for some reason, Aphrodite wanted to kill her. Perhaps she could not tolerate the title, most beautiful goddess, falling to someone other than herself. Regardless, at this moment, Aphrodite seemed to have forgotten her surroundings. Strength surged within her, and she stepped forward, rushing towards the deity whose power was clearly less than her own. And for reasons unknown, the gods present did not intervene. Even Zeus, who was most bound to maintain order, recalling the almost familiar sense, did nothing. He wanted to see why Keto felt familiar to him and what was special about her. Then, the next moment, the situation drastically surpassed what the gods had anticipated. With a swoosh, with a side step, Keto deftly dodged Aphrodite's aimless charge. She promptly grabbed the other's garment, and then pressed down hard. Following a muffled sound, the goddess of beauty immediately fell to the ground, and at this moment, Keto even took the golden apple leisurely and looked down at the being she once feared profoundly. Aphrodite, right. On her journey to the mortal realm, Keto had received 2 commands successively. One from the monarch of the central court, who foresaw the birth of the conflict over the golden apple, and ordered her to return to hell with it as soon as possible. The other was from the Lord of the 9 Hells, whose request was exactly the opposite. Asmodeus commanded her to stir up conflicts among the gods, and to ignite wars in the mortal realm, just avoiding Silver Moon City. However, the deity of Silver Moon City did not even attend this banquet, so that requirement was practically non-existent. Feeling the surge of power within, Keto smiled indulgently. I am the daughter of the primordial sea god, the symbol of the peril of the sea, Keto. Part of this palace belongs to me as well, why shouldn't I be here? As for you, true to the weakest of the principal gods of Olympus, compared to your face, your combat power is indeed a joke. Aphrodite was still struggling, but even far across the sea, above the sleeping trenches of Pontus, the law's suppression on deities still existed significantly. When the advantage in divine power was leveled, the conflict between the 2 goddesses of beauty became a one-sided slaughter. Holding the golden apple, an intriguing thought crossed Keto's mind at that moment. She raised her hand and wrote 2 characters on the golden apple, then with a gentle tug, 3 pieces of the peel fell to the ground. While the bystanders had yet to react, Keto took a step back. She released her hold over the goddess of beauty and, with a backhand slap, stuck the 3 pieces of peel onto Aphrodite's face. Smack. Rooting into the flesh, even just a piece of the peel of the golden apple, which contained a strong life force, had an indestructible property. In the next instant, Aphrodite's cheeks were exposed before all gods. You wanted the golden apple, but I think you only deserve a peel. You wanted to be the most beautiful goddess, but I think this suits you much better. Laughing loudly, Keto said disdainfully. Aphrodite, aren't you going to thank me for the gift I gave you? 3 pieces of peel, 3 lines of writing, only the middle piece stuck to her forehead was written by Keto. On the golden apple, only the character, beauty, remained. As for Aphrodite's face, from left to right, only, to the most useless goddess. Ellipsis. Ah. Keto. Ares, you kill her for me. Initially dazed, Aphrodite hadn't even realized what had happened. But the next moment, she saw her current disarray in the eyes of the other deities. The flames of shame and anger almost consumed her. She frantically rubbed her cheeks, but the marks caused by the golden apple were clearly not so easily erased. In fact, as a supplement, Aphrodite actually didn't need to do anything. Once she fully absorbed the power contained in the golden apple, the line of text would naturally disappear, and it could even beautify her. But for the goddess of beauty at that moment, even a minute or a second was unbearable. With her hands covering her face, her sharp screams echoed above the temple, and finally, upon his wife's screaming, the war god realized what had occurred. He immediately drew his sword, ready to reclaim honor on Keto. In terms of divine power, Ares wasn't even as strong as the goddess of beauty. However, in terms of combat power, if not for the law-suppressing divine power, he could even take on 2 Aphrodites. The suppression by the law was more pronounced in strictly regulated areas, like now, where he could easily defeat 10 goddesses of beauty over the sea. However, Ares clearly forgot that this was the palace of the ancient sea god, and all gods were gathered here at this moment. Enough! A stern shout erupted, and a vast presence surged from Zeus's being. In a flash, the situation in the arena changed abruptly. He could no longer afford to explore the familiar feeling on Keto, as the divine king looked around expressionlessly, causing several other eager gods to quickly abandon their intentions. Your Majesty, please take her down quickly, send her into the abyss. As if seeing a savior, Aphrodite shouted out immediately. However, Keto remained calm and composed. How is it? Attacking me in my own temple, a very sensible thing to do. I implore the just divine king to administer punishment. Remember, I responded with kindness. Not only did I not strike her harshly, but I even gave her a gift, preserving her remaining beauty. Sometimes rules can be disregarded, but sometimes they cannot. Since Zeus had gathered all gods in heaven and earth, Keto truly didn't believe he would act irrationally just for Aphrodite.